Part 1 of DxD, The Holy Night. As the sun set, the dusk's afterglow bathed the entire town. It brought a touch of coolness and filled the air with a comforting, relaxed atmosphere after a long day of work. At Kuoh Academy, energetic girls in their school uniforms waved their hands, politely bidding each other farewell. Kuoh Academy had been an exclusive all-girls school until just a few years ago. Recently, the academy changed its policy to become coeducational, opening its doors to male students. Even so, the male-to-female ratio remained incredibly low, with the girls vastly outnumbering the boys. Naturally, this made Kuoh Academy a paradise, the absolute dream school for adolescent boys brimming with hormones. Half an hour later, as darkness fell, even the dance club, which rehearsed the latest, disbanded to head home. The campus grew deserted and silent. The stillness under the gloomy night sky created an eerie atmosphere. Deep in the woods behind the campus stood a building with a medieval design, though its windows were completely intact. Moss and vines entwined the old school building, giving it a heavy sense of antiquity. Generally speaking, such old buildings are the perfect breeding ground for occult rumors and ghost stories. In fact, the 7 school mysteries of Kuoh Academy originated here, so regular students rarely set foot inside. However, just because it was deserted didn't mean it was empty. Rather than humans, it would be more accurate to say a group of devils was entrenched there. A plaque hung above one of the doors on the 2nd floor, Occult Research Club. Every corner of the room was covered in mysterious symbols. A strange script stretched across the floor, the walls, and even the ceiling. The most peculiar feature was the central circle. This circle, aka magic circle, occupied most of the room and glowed with a strange eerie light. The interior decoration and furniture arrangement were simple, featuring only a few sofas and a desk. This small room housed the most famous and influential figures in the academy. Issei, congratulations, you finally got a client of your own. Sitting at the desk was a girl with bright crimson hair and a curvaceous figure. This was Rias Grimoire, the school's #1 idol, possessing both beauty and a noble background. She was the president of the Occult Research Club. Congratulations, Issei, you're one step closer to your dream. Standing beside her was a girl with a black ponytail and a gentle smile, exuding traditional Asian charm. She was second idol of the school, Akeno Himehima. Along with Rias, she was known as one of Kuoh Academy's 2 great Onisamas, admired by both boys and girls alike. HMPF. The one sitting on the sofa eating snacks was Kaneko Tuju. With her petite figure, she looked like an elementary school student at first glance, making her the school's unofficial mascot. Standing nearby was a tall, handsome boy with short blonde hair and a sunny smile that made him instantly likable, Yuto Kiba. Excuse me, President, could I please take the rest of the day off and head home early? Issei scratched his head and apologized. Although he was overjoyed to finally have a dedicated client, freeing him from relying on Kaneko for clients and taking him one step closer to his dream of building a harem, he had prior obligations and needed to go home early tonight. Oh my, are you going to watch your treasured adult DVDs with your 2 friends again, Issei? Pervert. Kaneko delivered the finishing blow without hesitation. Rias looked at Issei with questioning eyes. No, that's not it. Feeling a little uneasy under her gaze, Issei quickly denied it. President, my brother came back from studying abroad today, so... Brother. Not only Rias, but Akeno and even Kaneko were somewhat surprised, looking up at Issei as he hurriedly explained. Yeah, I'm not an only child. I have a brother, but he went abroad to study when we were little and only comes home a few times a year. I heard he plans to return to Japan to finish his studies here. I see, I understand. I'll have Yuto handle your client today. Thank you, President. After thanking Rias, Issei turned to Yuto. Sorry for the trouble. Yuto responded with a hearty smile, and soon Issei left. Yuto turned to Rias. President, regarding Issei's brother, it was mentioned during our background investigation that Issei had a brother. His life is just like that of an ordinary human. Aside from studying abroad since he was young, he doesn't have any special background, so we didn't pay much attention to him. Rias nodded, indicating she understood. An ordinary human was not enough to attract her attention. Moreover, there were more important matters to attend to. Some time ago in Europe, Satan Ajuka's relative, the heir to the Astaroth clan, was annihilated by the church right in front of the Astaroth clan's elite. Now the supernatural world was in an uproar, and the once stable political climate had begun to fracture. This incident served as a catalyst, leading the three factions to begin localized preparations for war. Her family had begun urging her to return to the underworld as soon as possible to ensure her safety. However, if she returned out of cowardice and weakness, she would lose her only chance to fight for her freedom. By the time Issei arrived home, darkness had completely fallen. His reincarnated devil physique gave him exceptionally abundant stamina and energy. "Mom and Dad, I'm home." He took off his shoes and placed them in the entryway. "My foolish brother, you're finally back." A voice that Issei found extremely irritating entered his ears. Without thinking, he retorted sarcastically, "You bastard, you're finally back. Wow, you've changed quite a bit. You never used to talk to me like this." A face that bore a striking resemblance to his own came into view. Before him stood Issei's brother, Yasuhiro Hyoudou. The two shared a striking resemblance. If one had to distinguish between the two, Yasuhiro's had a slightly mature appearance. However, his warm and gentle temperament made him look like those sunshine boys. The most distinctive difference between the brothers was their hair color. Issei had brown hair, while Yasuhiro had black hair. Looking at Yasuhiro, his smile reminded Issei of Akeno. The two shared a striking resemblance in their cunning, sadistic nature. The thought of being mocked, teased, and bullied by his brother since childhood sent a chill down his spine. Has the anime already begun? Yasuhiro muttered to himself, looking at his brother, who exuded a faint demonic aura. Hello, I'm Asia, I will be staying here. Nice to meet you. Seeing Asia, with her long blonde hair, bowing and greeting him, Issei quickly introduced himself. "Hello, Asia, I'm Issei Hyoudou. You can just call me Issei. Your brother and Asia will be transferring to your school tomorrow. Take good care of them, Issei. Will you be in my class, the second year? What about you, bro? Your brother has already completed his second-year curriculum and will be transferring directly into the third year." Their father, who was reading the newspaper nearby, explained. "It feels like we have a new daughter with Asia here." Their mother showed no restraint in expressing her affection. Asia was a little overwhelmed by Mrs. Hyodou's enthusiasm, but the shadow that had been hanging over her heart for the past few days had dissipated somewhat. After finishing their meal, Yasuhiro took Asia upstairs to help tidy up her room. "Asia, are you still troubled by that matter?" It was phrased as a question, yet it carried an undeniable tone of certainty. Asia, who was unpacking her luggage, paused and quickly explained, "Lord Yasuhiro, no, I just..." Yasuhiro walked up to Asia, placed his hand on her head, and gently stroked her hair. He said tenderly, "Asia, that devil who tempted you to fall doesn't deserve your pity. The only right choice is to annihilate him on the spot. That is the greatest salvation God can offer to humanity." Asia nodded, her cheeks flushing slightly. "After you finish packing your things, get some rest. You have to go to the school to register tomorrow morning." Yasuhiro left Asia's room and went to his own bedroom, which he hadn't slept in for a long time. The room was spotless, without a single speck of dust, indicating that their mother cleaned it regularly. There were also childhood items sitting on the cabinets and bed, evoking a deep sense of warmth and comfort in him. Yasuhiro opened the window and let in a cool summer breeze, gazing out toward Kuoh Academy. Issei has already turned into a devil and become a part of Rias Grimori's peerage. It won't be long before this town becomes the starting point where everything begins, sweeping up the pantheons of the three factions. I'm starting to look forward to it. A sacred rune appeared in the palm of his left hand, illuminating the entire room with holy light before disappearing in the blink of an eye. The only one who noticed this strange phenomenon was Issei, whose room was right next door. When the aura appeared, Issei felt a violent sense of crisis that made his whole body tremble with fear, and the sacred gear residing in his left arm manifested on its own. Having just brushed up against the mysteries of this world and recently reincarnated as a devil, he was completely bewildered and clueless about what was happening to him. Hello everyone, I'm Yasuhiro Hyoudou. I hope you will all take good care of me during my remaining year on campus. Standing at the podium of Year 3, Class 1, after Yasuhiro finished his introduction, a chorus of joyful voices rose from the students. So handsome. His smile is so bright and warm. We finally have a Prince Charming like Kiba in our class. Excuse me, Yasuhiro, is Issei Hyoudou your? Upon hearing this, some students suddenly noticed that Yasuhiro's face bore resemblance to Issei Hyoudou, one of the notorious perverted trio in the school, and they shared the exact same surname. However, their demeanors were completely different. One was sleazy, exuding a lecherous aura that made people hesitate to approach him, fearing something unpleasant might happen. The transfer student standing at the podium was gentle and warm, a rare find. Not only did he not evoke any aversion, but he naturally made people want to get closer to him. If someone hadn't been paying attention and asked the question, the girls in the classroom never would have connected the two of them. Issei is my younger brother, he said with a warm smile. You're kidding. The difference between you two is just too great. Incredulous voices rang out across the room. This was a testament to the importance of one's aura. Yasuhiro looked incredibly handsome. While Issei was technically good-looking as well, the massive difference in their temperaments undoubtedly widened the gap between them over the years. SMA-CK. A loud sound on a desk interrupted the girls who were eager to barrage Yasuhiro with questions. The source of the sound was a petite, capable girl with delicate features and glasses. The imposing presence emanating from her wasn't diminished by her small stature, on the contrary, it was amplified by the strict, cold expression on her face, silencing all the students in the room instantly. Teacher, please begin the class. Right, okay, Yasuhiro, you can sit next to Sona, for now. The teacher, who had been completely ignored at the door, pointed to the imposing girl, Sona Shitori, who happened to have an empty seat to her left. Hello, Sona. Yasuhiro walked to his seat, greeted Sona, and sat down. Hello. Sona responded politely and then focused all her attention back on her textbook. Citri clan. Yasuhiro had been in this world for a long time. He only vaguely remembered fragments of the anime from his previous life, having forgotten most of the minor details. He remembered that Kuoh Academy was controlled by two high-class devils. One was the Grimoire clan, but he couldn't recall the other off the top of his head. It wasn't until he saw this imposing girl, radiating the pure-blooded aura of a devil and the unique demonic signature of the Citri clan, that he remembered the other noble clan controlling the academy in the anime. She had to be the heir to the Citri clan and the student council. President of the school. My connection with the Citri clan is quite deep too. Yasuhiro couldn't help but recall a powerful female devil from the Citri clan whom he had been hunting down. She was also one of the very few devils who had managed to escape his grasp. The teacher at the front was giving an English lesson, which Yasuhiro found incredibly boring. Having lived abroad for years, he was far superior to the teacher in both grammar and spoken English. My brother is actually a holy knight. That's impossible. Issei was completely shocked, staring in disbelief at Ria sitting in her office chair. If those words hadn't come from the president herself, no matter how convincingly someone else spoke, he wouldn't have believed them. The idea that his cunning brother, who had bullied him and played pranks on him since childhood, had actually become a holy knight for the church was a joke he couldn't have imagined in his wildest dreams. In his mind, such a possibility never existed. He felt the words church and brother were completely unrelated. He even remembered when his brother went abroad to study, he was so overjoyed he celebrated for several days after hearing the news. The joy he felt back then could still be savored today. It was the exhilaration of escaping the clutches of evil, a joy that emanated from every cell in his body. The president had actually told him that his brother had become a holy knight of the church. It was impossible to associate them with his sadistic brother. According to the intelligence we just received, your brother went abroad to study because a bishop from the local church discovered his talent and potential to become an outstanding holy knight. So, he left Japan at the age of 8 and joined the church, Akeno explained. Succinctly to Issei, summarizing the information. Ria sighed. This was something she never expected. The brother of her newly acquired servant was actually a holy knight of the church. If Sona hadn't told her, she wouldn't have believed such a coincidence could exist in the world. President, wasn't the holy knight class abolished by the church? Yuto's doubts, stemming from his childhood spent growing up in a facility in the Holy Sword Project, continued to trouble him to this day, yet they didn't hinder his basic understanding of church matters. The Holy Knight class originated before the Great War. At that time, Holy Knights were the main fighting force of the church. Exorcists back then were just peripheral members. The main fighting force used to exterminate stray devils were the Holy Knights. Whenever a large-scale battle occurred, it was usually a job for the Holy Knights. Holy Knights honed their bodies and absorbed the light-based energy permeating the air. Through secret arts within the church, they condensed a uniquely human power of light within their bodies. This allowed them to completely break free from relying on the power passed down from angels for combat, unlike ordinary exorcists. During the Great War, the Holy Knight Legion provided immense strength to heaven. Correspondingly, after the war ended, the three factions suffered heavy losses, and the Holy Knight Legion was almost completely wiped out. Therefore, the church announced the disbandment of the Holy Knight Legion to the outside world. That was merely a smokescreen, a way for the church to bide its time and lay low to the major factions outside. Rias intertwined her slender fingers, resting her delicate chin on them, and said, "The Holy Knight's lineage didn't suffer a complete break due to the Great War. According to our information, the church has been vigorously developing Holy Knights in recent years. Although their numbers and combat strength are far from comparable to their peak, they shouldn't be underestimated. This is an open secret among the major factions. President, are Holy Knights very strong?" Issei felt that the knights Rias talked about sounded impressive, but he lacked any intuitive reference to understand just how strong they were. Yes. Akeno took over answering for Rias. Due to her unique background, she knew certain secrets and had a deep understanding of the power of this special class within the church. Issei, the exorcists in the church today are a class that slowly emerged to try and replace the Holy Knights due to their scarcity after the Great War. However, in reality, exorcists and Holy Knights are more than just one level apart in terms of strength and experience. The minimum strength standard for a Holy Knight is equivalent to a middle-class devil, and the captains of the Holy Knights are all on par with high class. You can imagine how powerful they are. Upon hearing this, Issei was speechless. What kind of power did a high class possess? He knew perfectly well, because his master was a high class of the Grimoire clan. Each captain of the Holy Knights had the power of a high class, and no one knew exactly how many captains there were among their ranks. Thinking of this, Issei suddenly felt suffocated. He had always been suppressed by his brother since childhood. He thought he could finally get his revenge after being reincarnated as a devil, but in the end, he was still going to be unilaterally crushed. Your brother is under the supervision of the student council, and our main task is to take good care of Asia and ensure she isn't harmed in the slightest while at the academy. This is an agreement between our two sides." Upon hearing her words, Issei hesitated, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't. Anyone who heard that their family member was being monitored, especially if the monitor was someone they knew, probably wouldn't feel good about it. Rias saw the worry in Issei's heart and comforted him. "Issei, you've been reincarnated as a devil, while your brother is a servant of that person. Since the facts cannot be changed, you can only learn to adapt. You need to remember one thing. We in the church will always be enemies." "Yes, President." Issei wasn't unaware of these harsh realities, but asking him to adapt immediately was simply too much to ask of him. Ring, ring. The class passed by in a blur of boredom and yawns. No sooner had the teacher left than the girls in the class surrounded Yasuhiro again. They started making mindless advances, asking all sorts of questions, and even boldly inviting Yasuhiro to share a lunchbox. "Yasuhiro, let me show you around the campus." "I will take on that task," Sona said. Seeing that the student council president had volunteered, the girls next to her could only reluctantly step down. "Okay, thank you for your help." Finally, the two walked out of the classroom side by side. The two strolled leisurely side by side on campus, appearing as though they were having a casual conversation. Along the way, Sona gave a very detailed explanation of the Academy's environment, from the various facilities, the athletic field, and the student lounge, to procedures like asking for leave during the lunch break. He had to admire the seriousness and responsibility this young lady demonstrated as the student council president. Slowly, the two walked into the shadows behind the building. Sona stopped, her expression serious as she looked at Yasuhiro and said, "Having fulfilled my duties as student council president, I now, as the heir to the Sea-Tree clan and one of the Academy's administrators, to ask. What's the purpose of a person from the church trespassing into our territory without permission?" Yasuhiro wasn't surprised that his identity was recognized at a glance. Considering the extraordinary perception of devils, and the fact that he had almost unleashed the power of light within him without restraint earlier, he would have doubted whether devils could still maintain their status as one of the three factions if they hadn't noticed. Interesting. To you, the position of student council president at a mere human high school is far more important than your status as the heir to the Sea-Tree clan. This isn't the underworld, it is an academy. Naturally, my position as student council president takes precedence. You haven't answered my question yet. Otherwise, I'll have no choice but to expel you from the academy for your unjustified intrusion into our territory. Yasuhiro looked at Sona with a playful expression and said, "I'm a native of this town. I probably arrived here even earlier than you did. Isn't it a bit too domineering and inhumane to kick me out like this?" Generally speaking, that is indeed the case. In normal times, even with priests sent to the town by the church, we keep to ourselves. You govern the day, we govern the night. Each side has a clear division of labor and does not interfere with the other. Sona hesitated for a moment, then abruptly changed the subject. A sharp glint flashed in her eyes as she said, "As I just mentioned, that is the normal situation. But these are extraordinary times. That mad saint at the church's headquarters is even more cruel than us devils. The saint who embraces darkness has ruthlessly uprooted all the forces our faction developed in Europe for thousands of years. Countless devils have died, and even several pure-blood noble families of the 72 Pillars have been annihilated." As Sona spoke, she recalled the madness, cruelty, and bloodshed of that legendary lunatic, along with his merciless treatment of any devils he encountered, and she couldn't help but pause. Because of his frenzied extermination of devils in Europe, the relationship between the underworld and heaven has become increasingly tense. Not to mention that guy recently killed a blood relative of Mao. After hearing Sona's words, Yasuhiro's expression became somewhat intrigued. At the same time, he understood that if he didn't give this girl a satisfactory answer, he might really be driven away by her. Although he could easily overwhelm the entire academy with his strength, that wasn't what he wanted to do right now. Fortunately, he had prepared for this matter in advance. "If I said I came home to visit relatives." Looking into Sona's beautiful eyes, though she didn't speak, her answer was already glaringly obvious. Even if he were visiting his family, there would be no reason for him to transfer to Kuoh Academy, especially with a sister by his side. Let alone Sona, anyone familiar with the church's inner workings wouldn't believe Yasuhiro's lame excuse. His current identity was that of a holy knight of the church. Holy knights usually stayed stationed in one place and rarely left their designated church grounds. "I'm a holy knight assigned to protect Asia, the one who transferred into the second year with your brother?" Sona questioned. "As a holy knight of the church, you possess at least the strength of a middle class. The church wouldn't send you out just to protect an ordinary sister. Asia is no ordinary sister, she is a holy maiden of the church." A holy maiden. Holy maidens held a very high position within the church. Sona never expected that a holy maiden would actually enter their territory. Within the church, Asia's status far surpasses that of others. She is the possessor of the sacred gear, Twilight Healing. Twilight Healing. Sona had heard of this sacred gear. It was said that this gear could heal not only humans, but also non-humans, including devils and fallen angels. Therefore, this sacred gear held considerable weight among the various factions. Sona wasn't worried that Yasuhiro would lie to her. Although the spies of the various devil nobles at the European church headquarters had been completely eradicated by that madman, that didn't mean they had no other sources of information. With just a little investigation, they could find out the truth. Now that the Holy Maiden needs to experience the secular world, the Church has assigned me to protect her. I can believe your words for now, but there is one condition you must agree to, a condition that determines whether you and Asia can attend school here." Sona understood that the Church's Holy Knight in front of her was hiding something. She wasn't naive enough to think that the Holy Maiden's secular training was so simple. If that were the case, she could simply train within the sphere of influence of the European Church. There was no need to come to Japan, especially to conduct secular training in the territory of devils. It was completely illogical and unreasonable. "I'm all ears. You must join the student council. Your whereabouts at school will be under our constant surveillance. I hope you understand that this is the biggest concession we can make by allowing a holy knight from an opposing faction into our territory, especially considering that the relationship between the Church and the devils is at its most tense since the last Great War. In exchange, Asia's safety at the Academy will be protected by our Citri clan. I swear in my name that I will not allow Asia to suffer the slightest danger within the Academy." "Agreed." Without hesitation, Yasuhiro answered directly. "Good. I expect you to report to the student council on time tomorrow." "Goodbye, Yasuhiro." After saying that, Sona left on her own. After she left, the figure secretly monitoring them from within Yasuhiro's perception range also departed. It was a tall girl with long hair, who seemed to be the vice president of the student council. It seemed she was secretly guarding the area for the safety of her master. // My brother is actually a holy knight. That's impossible. Issei was completely shocked, staring in disbelief at Ria sitting in her office chair. If those words hadn't come from the president herself, no matter how convincingly someone else spoke, he wouldn't have believed them. The idea that his cunning brother, who had bullied him and played pranks on him since childhood, had actually become a holy knight for the Church was a joke he couldn't have imagined in his wildest dreams. In his mind, such a possibility never existed. He felt the words church and brother were completely unrelated. He even remembered when his brother went abroad to study, he was so overjoyed he celebrated for several days after hearing the news. The joy he felt back then could still be savored today. It was the exhilaration of escaping the clutches of evil, a joy that emanated from every cell in his body. The president had actually told him that his brother had become a holy knight of the Church. It was impossible to associate them with his sadistic brother. "According to the intelligence we just received, your brother went abroad to study because a bishop from the local church discovered his talent and potential to become an outstanding holy knight. So, he left Japan at the age of 8 and joined the Church," Akeno explained succinctly to Issei, summarizing the information. Ria sighed. This was something she never expected. The brother of her newly acquired servant was actually a holy knight of the Church. If Sona hadn't told her, she wouldn't have believed such a coincidence could exist in the world. "President, wasn't the holy knight class abolished by the Church?" Yuto's doubts, stemming from his childhood spent growing up in a facility in the Holy Sword Project, continued to trouble him to this day, yet they didn't hinder his basic understanding of church matters. The Holy Knight class originated before the Great War. At that time, Holy Knights were the main fighting force of the Church. Exorcists back then were just peripheral members. The main fighting force used to exterminate stray devils were the Holy Knights. Whenever a large-scale battle occurred, it was usually a job for the Holy Knights. Holy Knights honed their bodies and absorbed the light-based energy permeating the air. Through secret arts within the Church, they condensed a uniquely human power of light within their bodies. This allowed them to completely break free from relying on the power passed down from angels for combat, unlike ordinary exorcists. During the Great War, the Holy Knight Legion provided immense strength to heaven. Correspondingly, after the war ended, the three factions suffered heavy losses, and the Holy Knight Legion was almost completely wiped out. Therefore, the Church announced the disbandment of the Holy Knight Legion to the outside world. That was merely a smokescreen, a way for the Church to bide its time and lay low to the major factions outside. Rias intertwined her slender fingers, resting her delicate chin on them, and said, "The Holy Knight's lineage didn't suffer a complete break due to the Great War. According to our information, the Church has been vigorously developing Holy Knights in recent years. Although their numbers and combat strength are far from comparable to their peak, they shouldn't be underestimated. This is an open secret among the major factions. President, our holy knights very strong. Issei felt that the knights Rias talked about sounded impressive, but he lacked any intuitive reference to understand just how strong they were. Yes. Akeno took over answering for Rias. Due to her unique background, she knew certain secrets and had a deep understanding of the power of this special class within the church. Issei, the exorcists in the church today are a class that slowly emerged to try and replace the Holy Knights due to their scarcity after the Great War. However, in reality, exorcists and Holy Knights are more than just one level apart in terms of strength and experience. The minimum strength standard for a Holy Knight is equivalent to a middle-class devil, and the captains of the Holy Knights are all on par with high class. You can imagine how powerful they are. Upon hearing this, Issei was speechless. What kind of power did a high class possess? He knew perfectly well, because his master was a high class of the Grimoire clan. Each captain of the Holy Knights had the power of a high class, and no one knew exactly how many captains there were among their ranks. Thinking of this, Issei suddenly felt suffocated. He had always been suppressed by his brother since childhood. He thought he could finally get his revenge after being reincarnated as a devil, but in the end, he was still going to be unilaterally crushed. Your brother is under the supervision of the student council, and our main task is to take good care of Asia and ensure she isn't harmed in the slightest while at the academy. This is an agreement between our two sides. Upon hearing her words, Issei hesitated, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't. Anyone who heard that their family member was being monitored, especially if the monitor was someone they knew, probably wouldn't feel good about it. Rias saw the worry in Issei's heart and comforted him. Issei, you've been reincarnated as a devil, while your brother is a servant of that person. Since the facts cannot be changed, you can only learn to adapt. You need to remember one thing. We in the church will always be enemies. Yes, President. Issei wasn't unaware of these harsh realities, but asking him to adapt immediately was simply too much to ask of him. Ring, ring. The class passed by in a blur of boredom and yawns. No sooner had the teacher left than the girls in the class surrounded Yasuhiro again. They started making mindless advances, asking all sorts of questions, and even boldly inviting Yasuhiro to share a lunchbox. Yasuhiro, let me show you around the campus. I will take on that task, Sona said. Seeing that the student council president had volunteered, the girls next to her could only reluctantly step down. Okay, thank you for your help. Finally, the two walked out of the classroom side by side. The two strolled leisurely side by side on campus, appearing as though they were having a casual conversation. Along the way, Sona gave a very detailed explanation of the academy's environment, from the various facilities, the athletic field, and the student lounge, to procedures like asking for leave during the lunch break. He had to admire the seriousness and responsibility this young lady demonstrated as the student council president. Slowly, the two walked into the shadows behind the building. Sona stopped, her expression serious as she looked at Yasuhiro and said, having fulfilled my duties as student council president, I now, as the heir to the Citri clan and one of the academy's administrators to ask. What's the purpose of a person from the church trespassing into our territory without permission? Yasuhiro wasn't surprised that his identity was recognized at a glance. Considering the extraordinary perception of devils, and the fact that he had almost unleashed the power of light within him without restraint earlier, he would have doubted whether devils could still maintain their status as one of the three factions if they hadn't noticed. Interesting. To you, the position of student council president at a mere human high school is far more important than your status as the heir to the Citri clan. This isn't the underworld, it is an academy. Naturally, my position as student council president takes precedence. You haven't answered my question yet. Otherwise, I'll have no choice but to expel you from the academy for your unjustified intrusion into our territory. Yasuhiro looked at Sona with a playful expression and said, I'm a native of this town. I probably arrived here even earlier than you did. Isn't it a bit too domineering and inhumane to kick me out like this? Generally speaking, that is indeed the case. In normal times, even with priests sent to the town by the church, we keep to ourselves. You govern the day, we govern the night. Each side has a clear division of labor and does not interfere with the other. Sona hesitated for a moment, then abruptly changed the subject. A sharp glint flashed in her eyes as she said, "As I just mentioned, that is the normal situation. But these are extraordinary times. That mad saint at the church's headquarters is even more cruel than us devils. The saint who embraces darkness has ruthlessly uprooted all the forces our faction developed in Europe for thousands of years. Countless devils have died, and even several pure-blood noble families of the 72 Pillars have been annihilated." As Sona spoke, she recalled the madness, cruelty, and bloodshed of that legendary lunatic, along with his merciless treatment of any devils he encountered, and she couldn't help but pause. Because of his frenzied extermination of devils in Europe, the relationship between the underworld and heaven has become increasingly tense. Not to mention that guy recently killed a blood relative of Mao. After hearing Sona's words, Yasuhiro's expression became somewhat intrigued. At the same time, he understood that if he didn't give this girl a satisfactory answer, he might really be driven away by her. Although he could easily overwhelm the entire academy with his strength, that wasn't what he wanted to do right now. Fortunately, he had prepared for this matter in advance. "If I said I came home to visit relatives." Looking into Sona's beautiful eyes, though she didn't speak, her answer was already glaringly obvious. Even if he were visiting his family, there would be no reason for him to transfer to Kuoh Academy, especially with a sister by his side. Let alone Sona, anyone familiar with the church's inner workings wouldn't believe Yasuhiro's lame excuse. His current identity was that of a holy knight of the church. Holy knights usually stayed stationed in one place and rarely left their designated church grounds. "I'm a holy knight assigned to protect Asia." "Asia, the one who transferred into the second year with your brother?" Sona questioned. "As a holy knight of the church, you possess at least the strength of a middle class. The church wouldn't send you out just to protect an ordinary sister. Asia is no ordinary sister, she is a holy maiden of the church." A holy maiden. Holy maidens held a very high position within the church. Sona never expected that a holy maiden would actually enter their territory. Within the church, Asia's status far surpasses that of others. She is the possessor of the sacred gear, Twilight Healing. Twilight Healing. Sona had heard of this sacred gear. It was said that this gear could heal not only humans, but also non-humans, including devils and fallen angels. Therefore, this sacred gear held considerable weight among the various factions. Sona wasn't worried that Yasuhiro would lie to her. Although the spies of the various devil nobles at the European Church headquarters had been completely eradicated by that madman, that didn't mean they had no other sources of information. With just a little investigation, they could find out the truth. Now that the Holy Maiden needs to experience the secular world, the Church has assigned me to protect her. I can believe your words for now, but there is one condition you must agree to, a condition that determines whether you and Asia can attend school here." Sona understood that the church's holy knight in front of her was hiding something. She wasn't naive enough to think that the Holy Maiden's secular training was so simple. If that were the case, she could simply train within the sphere of influence of the European Church. There was no need to come to Japan, especially to conduct secular training in the territory of devils. It was completely illogical and unreasonable. "I'm all ears. You must join the student council. Your whereabouts at school will be under our constant surveillance. I hope you understand that this is the biggest concession we can make by allowing a holy knight from an opposing faction into our territory, especially considering that the relationship between the church and the devils is at its most tense since the last Great War. In exchange, Asia's safety at the academy will be protected by our Citri clan. I swear in my name that I will not allow Asia to suffer the slightest danger within the academy." Agreed. Without hesitation, Yasuhiro answered directly. "Good. I expect you to report to the student council on time tomorrow. Goodbye, Yasuhiro." After saying that, Sona left on her own. After she left, the figure secretly monitoring them from within Yasuhiro's perception range also departed. It was a tall girl with long hair, who seemed to be the vice president of the student council. It seemed she was secretly guarding the area for the safety of her master. // The Hyoudou residence. At the dinner table, Issei's mother asked about Asia and Yasuhiro's first day of school, wondering if they were adjusting well. Issei watched as the gentle, smiling Asia recounted some of the interesting things that had happened on her first day. A holy maiden of the church, possessor of twilight healing. Looking at Asia's smile, Issei couldn't help but think of. She was the second sacred gear possessor he had seen besides himself. Suddenly, Issei felt a sharp pain all over his body, and the bowl and chopsticks in his hands fell to the ground. But it came and went quickly, disappearing before he could even react to what had happened. Afterwards, Issei saw his brother smiling at him with his usual smile. For some reason, he didn't dare to look his brother in the eye. It felt as if looking directly into his eyes would burn him, as if he had encountered his natural enemy, making him feel uncomfortable all over. Issei quickly gathered up the dishes and chopsticks from the floor and hurriedly left the table. Brother, you really are a holy knight of the church. It was obvious to Issei that what happened during dinner was his brother's warning, and he secretly added the word petty to his mental image of him. President's words from before school ended kept echoing in his mind. He couldn't fully believe it until he was warned during the dinner. His brother had used the power of light, and he felt it deeply. After all, he had been tragically stabbed to death by his first love with a spear of light. However, the physical pain he experienced back then was not as deep-seated as the excruciating pain he felt at the dinner table. On second thought, it made sense. He was a devil now. Of course he couldn't tolerate the light as he did when he was human. That's right. I never expected my brother to have the audacity to reincarnate as a devil. It's quite impressive. Yasuhiro closed the book in his hand, sat down in the chair, and said casually. At that time. Issei instinctively tried to retort, but before he could finish speaking, Yasuhiro interrupted him. You were stabbed to death by your girlfriend. Issei, embarrassed and bewildered, pointed at Yasuhiro, who wore a half-smile on his face, and said, how did you know? Yasuhiro said. What's so difficult about that? Don't think only you devils have intelligence networks. Our church is no less capable than you. We have information on how you were reincarnated as a devil, and how you became a member of the Grimoire clan heirs peerage. And let me tell you something else, the fallen angel who killed you is now lurking in the town's abandoned church. Issei's expression changed with Yasuhiro's words, going from calm to ugly, and then from ugly to complicated. He tried his best to bury this matter deep in his heart. It was a scar, and only by burying it deep and ignoring it could he avoid feeling the pain. Seeing the change in Issei's expression, Yasuhiro didn't speak again, nor did he mention annihilating the fallen angel Rainer. Although, to him, that girl was at most at the peak of the low class, and annihilating her would be a piece of cake. However, this was a scar in Issei's heart, and Yasuhiro still hoped that Issei could resolve it himself. No matter what the final result was, at least he wouldn't have any regrets. Of course, if those fallen angels were to provoke him, he would kill them all without hesitation. After a moment, Yasuhiro broke the silence. Let me see your sacred gear. Upon hearing the mention of his sacred gear, Issei immediately perked up, concentrated his energy, and summoned the sacred gear residing within his body. This is my sacred gear. A crimson dragon gauntlet appeared on Issei's left arm, with a round, translucent gem set in the center. This was the boosted gear, which housed one of the 2 heavenly dragons, DxD, and was one of the 13 Longinus. No, it hadn't fully awakened yet. It looked like an ordinary dragon gauntlet right now, probably because the host's strength was too weak. Yasuhiro could sense a terrifying power contained within it, as if a fearsome behemoth was imprisoned inside. Looking at Issei with a hint of speechlessness, he knew from the anime before his reincarnation that Issei's summoned boosted gear was incomplete because his own strength was too weak. Only after transmigrating to this world and gaining a deep understanding of sacred gears did he realize that it was understandable if a sacred gear could not achieve its balance breaker. Not everyone and not every gear possessed this aptitude. However, generally speaking, summoned sacred gears are usually intact in terms of completeness. For Issei to weaken the majestic boosted gear into the appearance of an ordinary twice critical gauntlet was undoubtedly a unique talent. Brother, what do you think? Isn't my sacred gear amazing? The president said it's a dragon-type sacred gear. Issei's smugness prompted Yasuhiro to pour cold water on his enthusiasm, saying, "Yes, impressive, but your impressiveness goes in the exact opposite direction." "What does that mean?" Yasuhiro's words left Issei completely bewildered. "Judging from its appearance alone, your sacred gear is just an ordinary twice critical. Its function and ability are at most to double your power. Apart from being unable to interfere with the supernatural, it's the worst kind of sacred gear, barely touching the edge of middle class." "What?" Issei was shocked beyond his youthful life. "Of course. That's only on the surface, the reality is not that simple." Yasuhiro stopped teasing him and asked directly, "How many evil pieces did Rias Grimoire use for your reincarnation?" "All 8 pawn pieces." "That's right. The consumption of evil pieces is linked to the reincarnated person's potential. An ordinary person only needs 1 piece, but you used a full 8. Don't you know what that means?" Issei touched his nose, and said uncertainly in a low voice, "Could it be that I, like you, possess some kind of hidden potential?" He shamelessly thought that since his brother possessed the potential to become a holy knight, he might also have that potential, but it just hadn't been awakened yet. "Do you think that's possible?" Yasuhiro stared at him unblinking, making Issei feel guilty. His demonic power was so low that he couldn't even use a magic circle for teleportation. In order to help clients fulfill their wishes, he had to ride a bicycle and knock on doors to enter as a rookie devil. The root cause is that your sacred gear isn't a simple twice critical. Because your strength is too weak, you can't fully communicate with and manifest the sacred gear residing within you. Issei was speechless with frustration. He was truly sorry for being weak, he hadn't expected even sacred gears to be so picky. Otherwise, why would Grigori send a fallen angel to monitor you? There are so many sacred gear possessors out there, the only ones who warrant such a deployment are hosts with powerful sacred gears. Your twice critical, as it appears now, isn't worthy of being monitored by Grigori. Furthermore, the 8 evil pieces that you consumed are the strongest evidence. Located slightly north of Kuoh Academy, there was a wetland park, featuring a wide variety of public fitness equipment and recreational facilities, and covering a large area. This park was the only plaza-style recreational area in the entire town of Kuoh, and it was popular with the residents. Even office workers used it for recreation during their free time. The peaceful and tranquil environment effectively relieved the stress and boredom brought on by high-pressure work. However, tonight, the park was different from other times. The entire park was quiet and deserted, with only the soft chirping of insects in the night. Yasuhiro used a barrier to repel people, resulting in its current state of complete desertion. In the open space in the center of the park, Issei and Yasuhiro looked at each other. The two brothers' expressions were starkly different. Issei was filled with unease, while Yasuhiro wore a smile. Sacred gears feed on the host's thoughts. The stronger the host's thoughts, the more the sacred gear will evolve and become stronger. And do you know the most effective method for developing a dragon-type sacred gear? Yasuhiro's ambiguous smile intensified Issei's ominous premonition. Extreme anger and the danger of death are both the most effective ways to draw out dragon-type sacred gears. Issei couldn't help but tremble, and asked uncertainly, "Brother, you wouldn't want to?" Before he could finish speaking, Yasuhiro unleashed a light from his right hand. The dazzling light illuminated the dark corners of the woods, and even the full moon and stars in the sky paled in comparison to this radiance. Issei felt waves of dread washing over him, causing him to involuntarily take a few steps back. Even so, he couldn't suppress the terror in his heart. This is. As the light faded, what came into view was a simple yet elegant double-edged sword shaped like a ruler. The sword wasn't long. It was entirely silver-white, engraved with patterns, and had no actual blade. It was less a sword and more a scepter resembling a ruler from the church. The holy sword Excalibur, the Excalibur blessing. According to your understanding, it could be considered one of my sacred gears. Having just entered the supernatural world, Issei had no idea what a holy sword was. In his mind, it was only natural for his brother, who was a holy knight, to be paired with a holy sword, and he didn't feel anything was wrong with it. However, Issei's unease grew stronger and stronger. If the rest of the town witnessed this, they wouldn't remain calm. The holy sword brought more than just lethality to creatures of darkness like devils, it also had a powerful deterrent effect. Holy swords had slain countless devils throughout history, and the blood stained on them could make even the strongest devils tremble. Its formidable power was undeniable. You only need to remember one thing: the holy sword is the nemesis of devils, their natural enemy. For devils, being cut by a holy sword is more terrifying and more painful than the power of light. Issei's lips twitched, and he said, "Brother, you aren't going to use that thing to deal with me, are you?" Issei desperately wanted his brother to tell him that it was all a joke, but the next words shattered that last bit of hope. "Otherwise, do you think I would pull out this sword just to show off out of boredom? Be prepared, or you might die." Yasuhiro strode forward, raised the holy sword, and without any fancy moves, simply cleaved it downwards, aiming straight at Issei. Wait, you bastard." Issei could tell that his bastard brother seemed to be serious. The sword was coming straight at him, and before it even touched his skin, the power it carried leaked out, causing him a sharp pain. It was unimaginable what the consequences would be if it were a direct hit. Issei immediately rolled on the ground and jumped away, successfully dodging the attack in an extremely unseemly manner. "Huh, you dodged it. Damn, what's with that disappointed look on your face? If I were hit in the face, I might be done for. You bastard, you are just using the guise of developing my sacred gear to carry out my death, aren't you?" Regardless of what Issei was thinking, Yasuhiro continued his assault, wielding the Excalibur blessing relentlessly towards Issei. "This is the first time I've seen a devil so vulnerable. Issei, your weakness has redefined my understanding of devils. With your current level, you've broken the record for the lowest devil class, and that record may remain forever. ... This time, I wasn't fooled. ... I am swinging to the right. If I hit you, your right hand will be gone, and you'll have to rely on your left hand at night from now on. I think you'll get used to it. ... Faced with Yasuhiro's deliberate sarcastic remarks, Issei was now exhausted and had no energy left to pay attention or refute them. From a distance, Issei looked like a pitiful animal being chased around, desperately dodging the attacks of the sword time and time again. Yasuhiro blinked, and he cleverly struck Issei in the back. "Ah!" Issei, struck by the Excalibur blessing, gasped sharply and finally screamed in agony. It wasn't that Issei couldn't help it, the pain that Excalibur blessing brought him couldn't be simply explained by the word pain. He had never imagined that pain could be this intense, to the point that it pushed the absolute limits of his endurance. Even the endless flames of hell burning deep within his soul couldn't compare to this. However, no wound appeared at the spot where the sword struck. Excalibur blessing was a bladeless sword, yet his back had already been scorched into charcoal by the sacred power it carried. I forgot to tell you, the Excalibur blessing occupies an awkward position among all holy swords, being both the weakest and the strongest. It's the weakest because it has almost no offensive power, not even a sharpened edge. However, it's the strongest because it possesses absolute lethality against devils and other dark creatures, far surpassing other holy swords. Yasuhiro kindly reminded him, "With your current body, I only need to hit you twice more to break you down completely." What did he mean forgot? Issei knew his brother's personality all too well, it was definitely intentional. But what he said next made Issei's expression change drastically. "Dude, you aren't serious, are you?" The only answer he received was the sword coming crashing down on him, striking his chest heavily before he could even react. It was another wave of pain that penetrated deep into his soul. He could sense that through these two blows, a large amount of sacred power had accumulated within his body, constantly damaging his devil physiology. Perhaps, just as his brother had said, another blow would completely destroy his body. At the same time, the next attack was imminent. He wanted to dodge, but he lacked the strength. He had no energy left in his body, and his legs trembled. Just standing was a struggle. Closer, and closer. Thoughts and ideas welled up in his mind. The dissatisfaction of not being able to fulfill his ambitions. Guilt for not completing the president's task. And both dissatisfaction and respect for his brother. Still not enough. Yasuhiro frowned, looking at the unchanged boosted gear, already prepared to put away the sword. Suddenly, a majestic voice rang out. Boost. The boosted gear on Issei's left arm changed drastically, becoming much larger overall. It's a success. Yasuhiro removed the Excalibur blessing from Issei's forehead. Issei glanced at the sacred gear, which had changed drastically and feeling exhausted. He fainted right on the spot. Just as Yasuhiro was about to put away the sword and carry Issei home so that Asia could heal him, an anomaly occurred. Suddenly, a crimson magic circle appeared not far in front of Yasuhiro, and several people, no, it should be said that several devils, appeared. Issei. Emerging from the magic circle were all the members of Orc led by Rias. Seeing Issei lying on the ground, the others could hardly believe their eyes. Then, they glared angrily at Yasuhiro, who was standing to the side holding the Excalibur blessing. How dare you! Rias directed her fury at Yasuhiro, and a massive, crimson demonic aura imbued with a destructive will surged into the sky. Wait, Rias, we should get Issei back first, maybe there's still hope. Akeno rationally pulled back Rias, who was preparing to blow everything in front of her to smithereens. Hearing Akeno's advice, Rias calmed herself slightly, restrained her immense demonic power, and looked at Issei lying on the ground with a touch of self-reproach. If she had resolved everything before letting him go back, none of this would have happened. She never expected that Issei's brother was such an extreme, fanatical believer. Only madmen would harm their own family. Yasuhiro's current posture was indeed misleading, and there were also some traces of a fight between the two of them around the area. From these traces, it wasn't difficult to tell that only one side was chasing the other. Yasuhiro didn't offer any further explanation. He simply ignored the group and bent down to pick Issei up from the ground. However, in the eyes of Rias and the others, this scene looked like a desire to completely exorcise him. Kaneko, Akeno, get ready. Rias's anger, which she had just suppressed, was reignited. A holy sword. Before she could finish speaking, Yuto glared at the holy sword in Yasuhiro's hand. He gritted his teeth and used sword birth to create two demonic swords, slashing them toward Yasuhiro. No, it would be more accurate to say he was aiming for the Excalibur blessing. Excalibur. As Yasuhiro moved, Rias got a clear view of the Excalibur blessing in his hand and immediately confirmed its identity in her mind. No one understands holy swords better than a devil. Rias would never mistake it based solely on the holy power emanating from the blade. It's a holy sword. This is troublesome. However, whoever dares to harm a servant of Grimoire will pay the price. The trouble Rias mentioned wasn't simply about the holy sword itself or even its strength. The holy knights who possessed holy swords also held unusual positions within the church, and there was more. Kaneko, Akeno. Seeing Yuto relentlessly attacking Yasuhiro, Rias directed Kaneko and Akeno to help. She knew that Yuto alone was no match for him, and she decided to see if there was any hope of saving Issei. Lightning strike. Yasuhiro looked at Yuto, who was wielding his demonic swords and hacking at him like a mad dog. With a slight exertion of his right hand, he used Excalibur blessing to shatter the demonic sword in Yuto's hand. Then, he grabbed Yuto's head and threw him forcefully into the descending lightning magic. Akeno was terrified, but it was already impossible to pull back the strike. Yuto was struck by the lightning and immediately lost his mobility, collapsing limply to the ground. Immediately after, Kaneko's fist arrived right on cue. However, her monstrous strength had no effect on Yasuhiro, who blocked it with his hand. Without showing any mercy or pity, Yasuhiro struck Kaneko on the back of her neck with a quick, short blow, instantly draining her strength. Like Yuto, Kaneko collapsed to the ground. My, you really don't know how to treat girls well. You'll never be popular with the ladies. Akeno, dressed in her shrine maiden attire, spoke casually, but the shock and tension in her eyes were undeniable. Her fingers were slightly sweaty as she stood ready, not daring to attack rashly lest she follow in Kaneko's footsteps. The most surprised was Rias, who had the deepest understanding of her servant's strength. Both Kaneko and Yuto had the strength of middle class. Even if she were to fight the two of them together, it would take her some time. Moreover, Yasuhiro easily handled them while also dealing with her queen, who has the strength of a high class. Ultimate class strength. Rias made an initial assessment of Yasuhiro's strength and prepared for a retreat. Rias felt completely helpless. The strength of an ultimate class was beyond what she and her peerage could currently contend with. Even in the underworld, an ultimate class was considered one of the strongest beings. Many clan leaders were only at the high class level in terms of strength. If you insist on continuing, I don't mind. Rias Grimoire, but you might lose a servant with extraordinary potential. Yasuhiro looked at Rias and Akeno, who were on high alert, and couldn't help but speak up. The power of light within Issei was recklessly destroying his body. If he didn't receive timely treatment, he might actually die. Issei's alive, Rias exclaimed in surprise. Rias was a qualified master, always concerned about the safety of her servants. This might be related to her background in the Grimoire clan. He won't die for now, but who knows what will happen in a little while. Seeing that Yasuhiro seemed to have no ill intentions, Rias and Akeno slightly reduced their hostility, but they didn't lower their guard in the slightest. A holy knight training a devil, that's a bizarre story you'd never even read in a novel. Akeno approached silently from mid-air, observing that Issei was indeed alive, and then gave Rias a wink. I'm just helping him develop his sacred gear, after all, his master is a bit too shallow. Yasuhiro spoke frankly. In his view, even if his brother Issei was a bit of a waste, his master Rias still bore a great responsibility for not being able to fully awaken his sacred gear. You. Rias glared at Yasuhiro. He had insulted her in the very aspect she was most proud of, how could she not be furious? Isn't that right? You couldn't even develop the boosted gear, one of the 13 Longinus. What else could it be but shallow knowledge and shallow strength? The boosted gear. This time, it was Rias and Akeno's turn to be shocked, especially Rias. She had always known that Issei's sacred gear definitely wasn't a simple twice critical. How could it be simple when it consumed 8 pawn pieces? She hadn't just looked up information once, but she never dared to think about a Longinus because it was too rare and somewhat unattainable. This is the boosted gear. Legend has it that it can double the wielder's power every 10 seconds, until they attain power surpassing even Maos and gods. Rias noticed that Issei's left hand's twice critical had changed drastically, becoming the exact shape of the rumored boosted gear. Seeing this, Rias was speechless and unable to refute it for a moment. This confirmed Yasuhiro's assessment of her as shallow in every aspect, which made her resent him. Akeno, standing to the side, found it amusing to see Rias blushing slightly with anger and still unable to vent her frustration. This was a rare embarrassing moment for the president, it was just a pity she hadn't brought a camera. At the same time, Akeno also developed an interest in this ruthless knight. Yasuhiro hoisted Issei onto his shoulder and glanced at Yuto, who was slumped on the ground, still glaring hatefully at the Excalibur blessing. Yuto Kiba, I know you're a survivor of the Holy Sword Project. You and your companions are a stain covered up by the church. You deserve to die. Yuto absolutely wouldn't allow anyone to use the Holy Sword Project or his friends as a talking point. Especially now, those comrades hadn't just sacrificed themselves, but had also been regarded as a stain by the church. Yuto could never accept it. I'm simply stating a fact you're desperately trying to avoid. Because of the Holy Sword Project, you hate and despise holy swords, and you want to destroy all of them. In fact, the Holy Sword is without fault, it's merely a weapon. Its goodness or badness depends solely on the person wielding it. You understand this in your heart, yet you've consistently avoided it, directing all your blame and hatred toward a cold weapon. No, I didn't. Yasuhiro's words undoubtedly struck a nerve with Yuto, prompting him to instinctively refute them. However, he felt that any rebuttal would be pale and powerless. Yasuhiro turned around, carrying Issei on his back, and left, leaving them watching his figure recede into the distance. It seems our holy knight is kind-hearted deep down. Akeno observed Yuto for a moment, the hatred in his eyes had dissipated, replaced by boundless confusion. Yes, Yasuhiro is a good person. Kaneko rarely praised anyone, completely unconcerned about his earlier ruthlessness. The three of them understood the pain and hatred in Yuto's heart well, but they didn't know where to begin or how to resolve it. It seemed that Yasuhiro's remarks just now were quite insightful. But his words are so infuriating. Rias still harbored considerable resentment toward Yasuhiro. Rias, honest advice is hard to forget. Akeno, one of the 13 known Longinus in the world, is the boosted gear. It can double the power of its possessor every 10 seconds, or transfer this enhanced power to other weapons or people. Rumor has it that it can enhance power to the point of being able to defeat Maos and gods, Rias explained. That's amazing. Even Issei was somewhat dumbfounded by his own sacred gear. His consciousness was stuck on how yesterday he was almost murdered by his brother, who was more demonic than a devil, and how his sacred gear changed at the crucial moment. When he woke up in the morning, all the injuries on his body had disappeared, as if everything that happened last night was just a fleeting dream, provided there wasn't such a vivid and painful memory. When he came to school in the morning, he subconsciously avoided Yasuhiro, for fear of running into him. President, where is Kiba? Issei was so excited about the boosted gear that he just realized someone was absent from the ORC. Rias, who was sitting on the sofa eating snacks, suddenly turned pale. She thought of last night, when she was humiliated and furious. She unconsciously gritted her teeth, and even the joy she felt at knowing that her servant was the Red Dragon Emperor had largely faded. Even looking at Issei's face, which looked 80% similar to Yasuhiro's, she couldn't help but feel resentment welling up inside her. Issei was intimidated by Rias's gaze, wondering if he had done something wrong recently, offended the president, or said something inappropriate. Kiba just got a lecture from your brother yesterday, and everyone else, including the president, got a good lecture too. Akeno deliberately emphasized the last word, and sure enough, Rias's expression hardened even more, causing Issei, who was unaware of the truth, to take a few steps back to avoid being caught in the crossfire. After all, this was something his brother caused, and there was no reason for him to take the blame. Yesterday, unable to suppress his curiosity, he cautiously tried to ask. To his astonishment, Rias was so angry. This was the first time he had ever seen her so furious, especially since she seemed to be deliberately targeting him. His last remaining memory was the moment when the boosted gear fully awakened. After that, he knew nothing. Of course, he also didn't know that his brother had defeated Orc and insulted their master Rias. Calling that a defeat was an exaggeration. Yasuhiro only defeated Yuto and Kaneko. There was also Akeno and Rias. However, everyone present yesterday knew perfectly well that if Yasuhiro really wanted to make a move, none of them would be able to escape. Yesterday, your brother was more powerful than anyone expected, but... Shut up, Akeno. Let yesterday's matter rest. Don't bring it up again. Before Akeno could finish speaking, she was coldly interrupted by Rias. Rias looks angry, he. Akeno blinked playfully. Issei even had an urge to run out the door. The room was too cold and filled with the smell of resentment, and Rias was on the verge of exploding. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the student council office was no better than that in Orc. All members of the student council were present. The president Sona Citri, the vice president Tsubaki Shinra, and the other members all wore serious expressions and were on high alert. And the object that made them so wary was, of course, Yasuhiro. Sona, I have been law-abiding at school and haven't done anything wrong, so there's no need to be so hostile. Yasuhiro certainly knew why the entire student council was so nervous. Someone really showed off their prowess yesterday. What we didn't expect was that you are not only a holy knight of the church, but also a holy sword wielder, Sona said while adjusting her glasses. Yesterday, when she received the news from Rias, she was greatly shocked. Holy Knight and Holy Sword Wielder are two different concepts. To ordinary devils, there might not be much difference between the two, they are both warriors of the opposing church. However, devil nobles understood the very difference between them. Simply put, the root of a Holy Knight is protection, while the root of a Holy Sword Wielder is annihilation. Because the Holy Sword Wielder wields the Holy Sword, a weapon of immense destructive power against devils. They were known as the Church's executioner. Many people who know the details refer to them as Holy Sword Wielders. That was a miscalculation. This was her thought after receiving the news, otherwise, she wouldn't have so easily allowed Yasuhiro into the school. Similarly, there was also the issue of lacking intelligence. If it were any other time, they would know as soon as a holy sword wielder left the church's headquarters. They would never be in this current situation, where the enemy had infiltrated their territory and they still didn't know. If the other party hadn't deliberately revealed his identity yesterday, they probably wouldn't know how long they'd have been kept in the dark. She now had some doubts about whether the actions of that madman in the church, whom they terrifiedly called the saint who embraces darkness, in Europe were the result of deliberate indulgence by the church, with the aim of destroying the devil and fallen angel spies in Europe. What exactly is your purpose? Yasuhiro said with amusement. Sona, I think I already explained my intentions to you yesterday. Sona's eyes sharpened as she said, do you think I would still naively believe your words from yesterday? Even within the church, there are at most 7 holy sword wielders, and that doesn't even include the lost swords. In other words, no matter how high Holy Maiden Asia's status is, she is still just a holy maiden, not someone you should condescend to protect. Good reasoning. Yasuhiro clapped his hands and said, and then, Sona was speechless. Yes, even if they knew the other party had ulterior motives, what could they do? Capture him or expel him? It seemed that with their strength at Kuoh Academy, even with Rias's help, it probably wouldn't be enough. According to Rias's description, the opponent has ultimate class strength and wielded a holy sword. Even if he were driven out, there might be sacrifices they did not want to see. Don't be so arrogant. Don't forget this is our territory. Seeing the president's setback, Genshiro Saji spoke frankly. The other members also glared at him angrily. If the president hadn't warned them against making any rash moves in the first place, they would have already pounced on this arrogant guy and taught him a lesson. Sometimes, ignorance is bliss, that was undeniable. These servants, with only the strength of low class, knew far too little about the world. Among them, excluding Tsubaki, who was the first member of Sona's peerage and came from the Shinra clan, one of the 5 principal clans, who knew far more than the others. They were well aware of the strength of the church's holy sword wielders. Often, it's the monsters like Yasuhiro who are the most troublesome. This was also what Sona was worried about, the opponent was way beyond their league. Don't you know that arrogance is synonymous with the strong, while people who say things like you usually represent the weak? This sounded unpleasant, but if they put themselves in their shoes, it was true. To be arrogant in the territory of a rival faction, one was either a madman asking for death or a powerful individual with nothing to fear. How dare you underestimate our student council, Black Dragon's pulse. Enraged, Saji ignored Sona's advice and summoned his sacred gear, preparing to teach the other party a lesson. A sacred gear that houses the soul of the prison dragon king, Vritra. Yasuhiro glanced indifferently at Saji's sacred gear. This is not your qualification to stand before me, nor is it something you can rely on to challenge me. Yasuhiro, who had always been gentle and sunny, suddenly exuded a cold and arrogant murderous intent that swept over them head-on. What? All the members, including Sona, were stunned by this terrifying intent. How many devils would someone have to hunt down to accumulate such terrifying aura? Saji, who was bearing the brunt of the aura intent head-on, was trembling all over. He felt that his will be torn apart at any moment. Yesterday, Rias attacked him, and he could let it go because there was a reason for it. However, that didn't mean that just any low-class devil could provoke him. Saji was still struggling to hold on, he refused to give up, especially in front of this person. However, this wasn't something he could endure simply by wanting to. Just as he was about to collapse and faint, several magic circles appeared around him, filled with demonic power that was about to be unleashed. Are you going to make a move? Yasuhiro glanced indifferently at Sona. Yasuhiro, on behalf of my peerage, I apologize. We had no intention of provoking you. President. Just as Saji was about to say something, he was stopped by a look from Sona. I don't want this to happen again, and your peerage should also understand that people die in this world. Yasuhiro suppressed his overwhelming aura and then left the council. With the sudden release of pressure, Saji couldn't hold on any longer and collapsed to the ground. Sigh. Sona sighed. She hadn't expected things to turn out this way. Neither the other party's strength nor his arrogance was something she had anticipated. President, I can't believe it, Tsubaki trembled. Even she, who had followed Sona the longest, couldn't help but feel scared when faced with such a person, let alone the others. That murderous intent was terrifying. Even the most terrifying battlefield killers and gods of death in ancient history probably couldn't match the sheer magnitude and purity of this opponent's aura. You may all leave now. Yes, President. Several members helped Saji out, and finally, Tsubaki also left, leaving only Sona alone in the entire council office. That was the situation. Sona was in the council room, having a conversation with Rias via a projection. Sona, this is beyond our capabilities. Rias, do you mean we should inform our families? Rias nodded and said, at this point, it's the only way. Rias was extremely reluctant to rely on her clan's power, but she understood that now wasn't the time to be willful, she needed to be responsible for herself and her peerage. Just as Sona had said, a person with such terrifying aura had to be a dangerous individual. Most importantly, their two factions were on opposing sides. However, if we inform our families, it will be a completely different story, it could even spark a war between heaven and underworld. In the projection, Rias rubbed her forehead, her head aching. She was also worried about this. Both she and Sona held high positions in the underworld, their respective brothers and sisters were both Maos. Meanwhile, the other party was a holy sword wielder and a holy knight. It was easy to conceive his high status within the church. Both sides were heavily interconnected, and their actions would have far-reaching consequences. Let's observe him for a few more days, and at the same time, prepare for evacuation. Rias exclaimed in surprise, evacuation. She knew Sona cherished Kuoh Academy, but she never expected her to be so determined to leave it all behind. Our evacuation might also prevent the destruction of the academy, although that's the worst-case scenario. Night fell in Kuoh. The healing light emanating from Twilight Healing enveloped Yasuhiro time and time again. This continued until Asia was finally exhausted and breathless. Her pink pajamas were soaked with sweat, and she had no strength left to use her sacred gear. With Twilight Healing, you've already reached the pinnacle of healing spells alone, Yasuhiro said with relief. He could sense that Asia's current level of development with Twilight Healing was no less than what it would be in the later stages of the anime. Especially in terms of healing strength and range, it had been pushed to the extreme. However, the same problem still existed, she seemed to be only one step away from achieving her balance breaker. Because she lacked the experiences from anime, she had significant deficiencies in both personality and willpower. Asia, don't just see your Twilight Healing as a mere supplementary healing gear. It possesses immense potential, waiting for you to explore it. Yasuhiro believed that, apart from himself, Asia's potential was among the top tier in the church. Yes, Lord Yasuhiro, Asia responded timidly. In private, when no one was around, Asia still addressed Yasuhiro with honorifics. Yasuhiro had tried to dissuade her from doing so many times, but she still couldn't change her way of addressing him. Yasuhiro could only let things take their course. Suddenly, there was a knocking sound at the window. Yasuhiro turned his head and saw a bat familiar constantly tapping on the glass. Clutched in the bat's claws was an unopened letter, which was comically 2 or 3 times the size of the bat itself. Lord Yasuhiro. Asia, who was near the window, asked for Yasuhiro's opinion. Let it in. Yasuhiro could already guess the main purpose of the bat familiar's arrival. The bat familiar entered the room, placed the letter it was carrying into Yasuhiro's hand, and then flapped its wings and flew back out the window. Interesting. The letter's sender was, just as he had imagined, Sona. However, the content of the letter intrigued him. Asia looked at Yasuhiro, who had a smile on his face, with a puzzled expression. Asia, let's call it a day. You'll probably have to go to school by yourself tomorrow. I've something to do. Issei hadn't come home tonight, telling their parents he was staying at a classmate's house. Their mother had kept nagging him on the phone, telling him not to stay out too late, to take care of his health, and not to mess around. Yasuhiro, sitting nearby, had been both amused and exasperated. Knowing the truth, Yasuhiro figured Rias wouldn't let any of her servants near him until she was absolutely certain he was harmless. Lord Yasuhiro, what happened? Asia asked with a hint of worry. Sona wants to go on a one-day date with me tomorrow. Yasuhiro waved the letter in his hand. He thought of Issei, whose first love had also ended in a single day. A date. Asia seemed to have thought of something indecent. Her voice rose a few decibels, her face flushed, and her fingers fumbled together nervously. Hey, you impure nun, it's just a perfectly normal date. I am not impure. Lord, Yasuhiro is bullying me. Yasuhiro's tone was too ambiguous, and he specifically mentioned a one-day date, which made the innocent Asia imagine the casual conversations she had heard from the other nuns. The next day. Kuoh Cafe. Yasuhiro arrived at the address given in the letter. From the outside, he could see into the cafe, where a stunningly beautiful girl was already waiting for him. Sona had shed her usual strict school uniform and donned a light blue and white long skirt. She held a book in her hand, reading it attentively. She had dropped her usual on-campus seriousness, giving off a fresh and charming aura. Yasuhiro, making a girl wait is impolite. It's exactly 9 o'clock. Yasuhiro glanced at the vintage clock hanging on the wall. What surprises me is that the student council president is skipping classes to go on dates with a boy. It isn't like you at all. If the rest of the school finds out about this, it'll definitely make the front page, Yasuhiro couldn't help but tease. I took a leave of absence. Yasuhiro shrugged helplessly. He hadn't asked for leave, so he was essentially absent without cause. Before becoming the student council president, I was just an ordinary student at the academy. I didn't feel superior to others, nor did I feel unapproachable. That's a pretty fair point. Sona, why did you suddenly decide to have a date with me? We didn't have a very pleasant interaction yesterday, Yasuhiro asked. It was indeed something he couldn't fully understand, yet he also found it interesting. I wanted to experience what it is like to go on a date. Sona closed the book in her hands, placed her hands on the table, and spoke calmly and elegantly. Very well, may I arrange a wonderful date for you? Yasuhiro, acting in an extremely gentlemanly manner, took Sona's hand. Sona frowned slightly. This was the first time in her life she had been in such close contact with a boy. She struggled slightly for a moment, then relaxed and let his hand hold hers. Yasuhiro pulled Sona to her feet, and they walked out of the cafe together. Kuoh Amusement Park was considered an old relic in Kuoh town, holding the childhood memories of most of the local youth. With a Ferris wheel, roller coaster, pirate ship, the facilities were quite huge. The amusement park had been established for over 10 years, yet it still attracted a constant stream of visitors. It wasn't a holiday today, and it was still morning. Apart from a few elderly people exercising, the amusement park wasn't crowded at all. Just then, a couple holding hands appeared at the entrance. Since this is a date with a limited time, let's keep it light and fun. I imagine you don't come to places like this often. Sona nodded, confirming that Yasuhiro's words were true. Her birth meant that she had to give up certain things. Things that others took for granted were things she could never hope for during her childhood. With her sister being one of the current 4 great Maos, her personal brilliance was completely overshadowed. Under this invisible pressure, she couldn't do anything inconsistent with her status, otherwise, she would be tarnishing her reputation as the sister of the Mao Leviathan and the name of the Sea-Tree clan. Even as she grew up, she had long passed the playful stage of childhood. However, that innocent hope had always remained buried deep within her heart. Now, Yasuhiro's actions gave Sona a sense of comfort and support. Let's go, our first destination is the Ferris wheel. Yasuhiro ran to the Ferris wheel ticket booth and, under the helpless gaze of the staff member, bought 2 tickets. Because it wasn't a holiday and it was still morning, they were the only 2 people riding the Ferris wheel, essentially having the entire ride to themselves. When I was little, my favorite thing to do was sit on the Ferris wheel and look down at the whole town. Sometimes, when I was feeling down or had upset my parents, this was my best refuge. Yasuhiro said nostalgically. Sona gazed through the glass, taking in the scenery outside. As the Ferris wheel rose higher and higher, the entire landscape of the town gradually came into view. What a nice view! Sona couldn't help but exclaim in amazement. For the first time, she looked down on the entire town of Kuoh from high above. The town had neat houses and winding streets, dotted with patches of woods. The streets were filled with a loose flow of people, looking peaceful and serene. In particular, when she saw the students having physical education class on the athletic field, those slacking students being punished by having to stand outside, and the students secretly skipping class and preparing to climb over the wall. She couldn't help but feel an urge to protect this vibrant and pure land before her. How are you feeling? The lingering worries and anxieties in my heart have almost completely disappeared, and I'm starting to look forward to the next activity. Sona ran her fingers through her hair, smiled, and said something with a hidden meaning. Has anyone ever told you that you look beautiful when you smile? You're the first. Yasuhiro touched his forehead and said, it's truly my honor. The noise and sounds were incessant. Sona was a person who preferred quiet, and if Yasuhiro hadn't been holding her hand, she'd have left. She didn't want to stay in such an environment for even a second longer. A must-visit place for all students. Yasuhiro winked and grinned mischievously. That's right, Yasuhiro had brought the Sona to an arcade. Entertainment venues like arcades are usually packed with people, with no empty seats even on weekdays. Yasuhiro exchanged nearly 100 game tokens in one go, seemingly preparing to take Sona to play every single game in the entire arcade. First, he pulled Sona to an empty claw machine, inserted the coins, and gently pressed her small shoulders to make her sit down. Please do your best. Yasuhiro made a gesture of invitation. Sona rolled her eyes at Yasuhiro, clearly annoyed. She had seen claw machines countless times but had never actually played one herself, so she had little interest in them. In her view, playing claw machines was a simple thing. Sometimes she didn't understand why many of her classmates spent almost all of their monthly allowance trying to win a favorite plush toy, only to fail and then try again. Soon after, she realized that nothing is as simple as it seems. 1, 2, 3. After nearly 10 consecutive attempts without catching a single prize, even the usually calm and collected Sona couldn't help but subconsciously slap the claw machine's control panel. Half an hour passed. She had invested nearly 100 game tokens, and despite her flurry of practice as a rookie, she still hadn't made any progress. In the end, the arcade manager, feeling sorry for them, opened the claw machine and just gave them one. Sona held the black doll in her arms, which perfectly represented her inner feelings. Her face was flushed red, and she dared not look up, acting like a shy, love-struck girl. She was afraid that Yasuhiro beside her would see her embarrassing state. Of course, she recovered soon. Yasuhiro exchanged another 100 or so game tokens for Sona and began to play other games. Yasuhiro and Sona had spent the entire day in the arcade. Under Yasuhiro's guidance, Sona gradually went from being reserved to fully immersing herself in the experience. Now I finally understand why some students are so obsessed with arcades, this really do relieve stress and frustration. Thank you, Yasuhiro. What's wrong? Seeing that Yasuhiro didn't respond, Sona followed his gaze and saw that he was looking at a man in black. The man was wrapped up tightly in his clothes and exuded a disgusting aura. A devil, or rather a stray. Sona's hand tightened. She hadn't expected to encounter a stray devil here. Strays usually roam at night, partly to evade capture and partly to make hunting easier. What troubled Sona was that there were so many people here, and it was too late to set up a barrier to repel them. Acting rashly and alerting the enemy would stimulate the stray's ferocity, causing it to go on a killing spree right here in the arcade. Everything that happened today made Sona even more reluctant to disrupt the peace and tranquility of the town. As she was agonizing over her decision, "Don't worry, leave it to me." Yasuhiro patted Sona's head. After spending the day together, Yasuhiro and Sona naturally began to engage in some of the affectionate actions that only a formal couple would do. Of course, Sona didn't feel the slightest aversion to this. "Get out of my way if you don't want to die." The stray sensed Yasuhiro's approach and a low sinister growl emanated from it. Yasuhiro chuckled inwardly. He had almost Forgotten the last time a devil had been so arrogant towards him. Ignorance is really a bliss. Yasuhiro walked over to the stray and casually placed a hand on his shoulder. Devils who stray from their masters are always short-tempered, bloodthirsty and ruthless. What happened? The stray, who wanted to break free, was shocked to find himself unable to move. It wasn't some kind of intimidation. He discovered that the cause of this phenomenon was the guy in front of him. The hand resting on his shoulder was like a nail, pinning down all his physical strength and his demonic power. Under the ashen gaze of the stray, Yasuhiro pressed his thumb directly into a vital point on its throat. Now the stray devil understood that the seemingly fragile student before him was the hunter, and he was merely the prey. In the desperate and regretful eyes of the stray, Yasuhiro's fingers were nearly an inch deep into its throat. Yasuhiro gently pulled his fingers out and wiped the blood off on the stray's clothes. After that, he positioned the stray on a stool so it appeared to be in a drunken stupor, and quietly left. All right, it's resolved. Now time to bring our date to an end. It wasn't until Yasuhiro walked up to Sona that she realized what had just happened. Sona was shocked by Yasuhiro's methods. She was absolutely certain that Yasuhiro dealt with the stray without using even the slightest bit of light or any other supernatural power. That guy was killed purely through skill. After a pleasant day together, Sona had almost forgotten that the person beside her was the executioner of the church. The way he casually annihilated the stray devil sent chills down her spine. It was already evening, and the number of people at the Kuoh amusement park was much higher than during the day. The children's laughter added a lot of joy to the amusement park, which had been rather quiet during the daylight hours. As Yasuhiro and Sona left the arcade, they strolled leisurely through the park with hand in hand. Although their fingers weren't quite intertwined, to outsiders, they undoubtedly looked like an enviable couple. However, Sona looked exhausted. We've arrived. What came into view was an open-air music pavilion situated on the water, surrounded by a path less than half a meter wide with water flowing around it. At that very moment, outside the pavilion's waterway, a large crowd had gathered. Inside the pavilion, a clear young man was playing a tune that was both romantic and poetic. His piano-playing skills, even compared to the average person, were ordinary and mediocre. The echoes and the climactic reverberations in the performance were completely lacking. Even an ordinary person could hear the stumbles and bumps, not to mention the subtle errors. He was a complete beginner, an absolute rookie. Of course, these criticisms were only from outsiders, for the person the man in the music pavilion wanted to express his feelings to at that moment. Looking at the girl standing at the front of the crowd, her face full of excitement and love. For many girls in the throes of new love, a romantic gesture or a tender act is sometimes more powerful than a multitude of sweet words. The music ended. The man in the pavilion breathed a sigh of relief. In the eyes of professional pianists, this piece was just a practice exercise for beginners. But for someone who didn't even know how to read sheet music or understand how to play a piece with echoes just a month ago, this was no less difficult than pushing himself to his absolute limits. When he saw his girlfriend, he felt that his efforts over the past month hadn't been in vain. Clap, clap, clap. The surrounding audience tactfully offered their blessings with applause. This is one of the few places for many people who grew up here, it's an essential spot for romance. After explaining this, Yasuhiro walked alone to the music pavilion without waiting for Sona's response. The crowd, who were just about to disperse, looked somewhat surprised to see someone else step up into the pavilion. For many people, this was the perfect place to confess their love and express their romantic feelings. However, the talent to play the piano isn't something everyone has. Not all people have that kind of dedication and courage. Therefore, this scene wasn't common for the local residents. Seeing 2 such instances per week was considered quite lucky. What's more, in just one evening, 2 boys had stepped in to play the piano and express their feelings for the girls they loved. Yasuhiro moved to the center of the pavilion, slowly sat down, and amidst everyone's anticipation, his performance didn't begin. Instead, he first did what every musician must do before a performance, adjusting the unfamiliar instrument and getting a feel for its keys. The loyal audience surrounding the place were full of anticipation for his performance. Even though many of them didn't understand the meaning behind Yasuhiro's occasional hand gestures, they showed him the utmost patience. Meanwhile Sona was lost in thoughts. As a pure-blood devil noble from the underworld, she knew that the social structure of devils was heavily influenced by the human world. Although their arts of music, chess, calligraphy, and painting couldn't be fully compared to human society, they were still compulsory courses for the heirs of Devil Clan. Because of her deep involvement in chess and raiding games, she was somewhat biased toward strategy, but this didn't mean she had a superficial understanding of the piano. On the contrary, her skill with the piano was second only to her chess skills. Therefore, compared to the others who only had a superficial understanding, she had a much deeper and more accurate appreciation for Yasuhiro's adjustments. This made Sona look forward to what kind of beautiful music Yasuhiro would be able to play. It was bound to be impressive. After all, judging from Yasuhiro's skillful movements, he didn't seem like someone who was just a rookie. 5 more minutes passed. Once Yasuhiro had finished his preparations, he placed his hands on the piano. At this moment, everyone, including Sona, noticed Yasuhiro. Now, everyone was filled with anticipation, wondering what kind of beautiful and romantic piece of music it would be. The first note rang out. A gentle melody filled everyone's ears. It wasn't the romantic tune they had imagined, instead, it carried a strange sadness, a sense of loss for the beauty left behind at the beginning of life. The rhythm of the music, sometimes slow and sometimes fast, evoked fond childhood memories and a sense of cherished loss in everyone. The unhurried rhythm completely immersed the listeners in the music. With its highs and lows, it was as if they could see the joy of receiving their first toy as a child, the trepidation of starting school for the first time and the nervousness of starting work for the first time. All these moments were vividly recalled in that exact moment. Sona, standing to the side, felt deeply connected. To a large extent, this piece was specially played by Yasuhiro for her. At the same time, it was the piece chosen to conclude this pleasant date. Sona seemed to see herself born into the Seatree clan, spoiled by her parents and sister. She saw it, all her hard work seeming insignificant in the shadow of her sister. She saw it. For the first time, she rebelled against her family, used a raiding game to defeat her former fiancé and broke free of the shackles that bound her. She saw them, her own peerage members. This piece of music seemed to allow Sona to review every detail of her life, and the mood and meaning within the melody made Sona more determined in herself. She wasn't just the sister of the Leviathan or heir to the Seatree clan, she was just being herself. The slow melody gently faded into everyone's memories. It took the audience several minutes after the piece finished playing to slowly come back to their senses. They looked at each other in bewilderment. Yasuhiro had completely changed the atmosphere. Mostly the music played here will be full of romance and love. Not the somewhat melancholic tunes that Yasuhiro played. The pain in the music was subtle, and what resonated most was the regret and the fleeting nature of their lives. Clap, 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 clap. Sona broke the silence and was the first to applaud. Then the others followed, and the place was enveloped in thunderous applause. Regardless, it was a good piece of music, and what was most commendable was that the performer had fully expressed the root of the piece. I've never had the chance to hear myself, supposedly written by a famous European exorcist. Today, my wish finally came true. In contrast, some people might have had their doubts. Sona had learned about this piece through the grapevine, but she only had a superficial understanding of it. No matter how devils might be, they don't forbid themselves from listening to a piece just because it was written by an exorcist. Thank you. Sona wiped away the tears from the corners of her eyes and thanked Yasuhiro. She didn't know if it was because of the song myself or because Yasuhiro had agreed to her sudden request to go on a date with her today. Judging from the situation, it was probably a mix of both, but the latter likely played a larger role. Yasuhiro then curled his lips into a smile and then abruptly took a step forward, closing the distance between him and Sona. His movement made Sona's heart skip a beat. Before she could ask anything, he pulled her closer. Sona stared wide-eyed. // Sona, Sona-chan, President, Miss. Leaving the park, Sona walked ahead with a frosty expression face, while Yasuhiro followed behind, constantly calling out to her. Okay, I'll be more careful next time. Yasuhiro stepped past Sona, stood in front of her, and shrugged his shoulders. Sona's slightly calmed-down mindset was reignited by Yasuhiro's words. Don't even think about doing it again. Sona glared at the shameless guy before her. That had been her first kiss. And it was taken away so easily and in a crowded public venue. Even now, she was still in a daze about how she made her embarrassing escape from that place. Sona, the wonderful nightlife has just begun. Would you be so kind as to invite me to a passionate NIGHTLIFE? As a high school student, how could Sona not understand the meaning behind this bastard's words? Because she understood, she looked at him with a flushed face, not knowing whether it was from anger or something else. But judging from her face, it was probably mostly from anger. Such remarks are far too frivolous and rude to say to a girl you have only known for 2 or 3 days. For girls, nightlife, in every sense of the word, is bad. Sona gave up on pursuing the kiss issue relentlessly. She realized that she was completely outmaneuvered by Yasuhiro. You aren't just any ordinary girl, you are a devil. Aren't devils nocturnal creatures? Sona looked at Yasuhiro, who seemed utterly unfazed and didn't know what to say. Sona took a few deep breaths to calm herself down, and her expression returned to its usual calm and composure. I don't know which one is the real you. She wondered which was his true self. Was it the overwhelming power to crush those who provoked him, or being a comfortable lover? Or perhaps it was this shameless act of taking advantage and then acting cheeky right now. She was completely baffled. In fact, from their very first meeting, she had never truly understood this person, not even a fraction. Even now, her strongest impression of him remained that of a holy knight and a holy sword wielder. The kind of person you want to face doesn't depend on me, but on your attitude. That's truly a heretical statement. Sona was surprised. Was this really something a person of the church should say? Could I assume that if our attitudes are excellent, there's a possibility we could become friends? You can think that way, and I don't object. Having a beautiful girl like you as a friend is great. Sona was once again surprised by Yasuhiro's deviant behavior. If he were an ordinary church member, she wouldn't have felt too much discomfort. However, the person in front of her was a holy knight. Regardless of the title, within the church, it not only represented a high status but also his devout faith in the God of the Bible. You're less like a holy knight and more like a stray exorcist. Sona's words made sense. No member of the church could openly say that they would befriend a devil, no matter what reason or excuse they gave. Such a thing was considered a serious sin within the church. In the anime, Asia was merely filled with pity and used twilight healing to heal a devil. Unfortunately, she was discovered and excommunicated from the place where she had grown up. She was even branded with the shameful title of witch. In some respects, the church and heaven were the most rigid places of system and order among the 3 factions. What's the point of discussing things if we don't even know if the object of our faith still exists? Besides, it's better to believe in yourself than in something vague and unknowable. Yasuhiro already knew that the God of the Bible had perished in the Great War. Moreover, strictly speaking, he was a believer of God's strength, not his miracle, and he wouldn't have become a member of the church if it weren't for this special reasons. Of course, to Sona, these words were no less than witnessing a declaration of falling from grace. The two remained silent the entire way. Sona was at a loss for words, completely stunned by Yasuhiro's statement. Her wariness of Yasuhiro rose once again. It was often the unknown and unpredictable people who seemed the most dangerous. That's what Sona thought. Yasuhiro acted as her protector, escorting Sona all the way to her residence. I hope we can live peacefully together at Kuoh Academy. That was what Sona said before she went inside. Yasuhiro watched Sona's departing figure without replying, simply observing quietly until her figure disappeared from sight. Rias, be prepared to notify our families at any time. Upon returning to her residence, Sona immediately contacted Rias. Has his danger level been confirmed? Rias knew that Sona had tested Yasuhiro today, but she didn't ask about the specific methods or procedures used. She simply told her to be careful. Yes, he's too unknown and dangerous. Sona was still holding the black bear plush that she and Yasuhiro had won together from the claw machine earlier. She didn't deny the actual experience of her date today. It was a romantic and wonderful date with Yasuhiro, bringing a feeling of closeness and understanding she had never experienced before in her entire life. However, this didn't mean she could ignore the danger posed by him. Both his strength and his attitude toward matters were extremely dangerous, especially for them. After all, their identities weren't simply those of high-class devils. In some ways, they also represented the dignity of their older siblings as two of the four great Maos. When certain things happened to them, the political impact could be amplified to an infinite degree. Sona, I understand. Please be careful on your end as well. Rias was worried about Sona than she was about herself. The two had different roles. Rias's main job was to protect Asia's safety at the academy. Meanwhile, the council's duty was to monitor Yasuhiro. Yasuhiro and Asia had been at Kuoh Academy for almost a month now. Aside from some initial unpleasantness between Yasuhiro and the council, he didn't do anything else out of line. This brought a sigh of relief to the council and the ORC. Things were going better than they had anticipated. Rias and Sona postponed sending the letters they had prepared for their families. You lost. In the student council room, everyone was present. Yasuhiro and Sona were playing chess. On the chessboard, Yasuhiro playing as white had successfully defeated his opponent's king. Hearing these words, the other members paused their work, glancing at Sona. She was staring at the chessboard with an incredulous expression, as if she couldn't understand how she had lost. They had lost count of how many times the president had been tormented today. In their view, it was simply masochism for Sona to keep playing chess against Yasuhiro. Over the past month, their relationship had improved considerably due to their extended contact with Yasuhiro. Moreover, they discovered that as long as they didn't cross certain lines or violate his taboos, and setting aside his identity as a church member, he was actually a gentle person. That was how it appeared on the surface though. As for the chess matches with Sona, it started a week ago. Compared to being easily defeated, the fact that Sona could now withstand a few more moves from Yasuhiro was a huge improvement. Of course, they could only keep such thoughts to themselves. No one dared to say it out loud. Your knight, wasn't it supposed to be bait? Now it has become a hidden threat, Sona asked. The art of war is based on deception, you've probably heard that phrase many times before. Sona nodded, and the others also pricked up their ears to listen. Knowing is one thing, but how many people in the world can truly apply it flexibly? Yasuhiro picked up the knight on the chessboard and said, in your eyes, it was always bait. That's just your perception, or rather, what I led you to believe. Whether in a game of chess or on the battlefield, to use a very down-to-earth term, it is about control. Whoever can lead the opponents. Pace is the ultimate victor. Often, the gain or loss of a single piece or skirmish is insignificant in the grand scheme of things. Whoever can dominate the overall situation is the true master of the battlefield. Yasuhiro's remarks were like a depth charge. The others forgot their work, and even if they didn't quite understand, they still felt a sense of awe and wonder. Sona and Tsubaki were different. Born into the Shinra clan, one of the 5 principal clans, Tsubaki had a considerable understanding of strategy since childhood. She felt that even some clan members who had been immersed in this field for many years couldn't analyze it as thoroughly as Yasuhiro sitting in front of her. Was it a difference in perspective, or something else? Sona felt that Yasuhiro at this moment resembled a certain person. One of the 4 great Maos, Falbium Asmodeus. As the greatest strategist in the underworld, Falbium was in charge of all military affairs for the devils. Because her older sister was a Mao, the greatest strategist had personally tutored Sona for a period of time. To her surprise, she discovered that through getting to know him, these two individuals, despite being vastly different in status and allegiances, had a thorough understanding of strategy and planning. They both offered insightful and penetrating analyses that cut through the fog of confusion. It was as if everyone else was drunk, while they alone were awake. Or more like everyone was stupid. Sona realized that the person in front of her was like a treasure buried deep underground, just when she thought she had uncovered all his secrets, more mysteries would occasionally emerge. This man is dangerous. Sona thought again. Tsubaki, please make me a cup of tea. Sona sighed as she looked at Yasuhiro ordering her queen. After all, the condition they had agreed upon from the beginning was that winning the chess match would grant him privileges within the council. Please enjoy. Tsubaki stood up slightly, without correcting Yasuhiro's overly familiar address. Instead, she skillfully used the tea set she had prepared to brew him a cup of tea. Sona felt helpless and somewhat regretful for playing chess with Yasuhiro. Now, as their master, her authority and presence in front of her peerage members had seriously declined. Amazing, Yasuhiro praised. Compared to the austere life of the church, devils certainly knew how to enjoy themselves. Yasuhiro remembered when he was training at the church, he submitted a report entitled Faith and Life, which resulted in him being severely beaten by his beautiful teacher. To this day, the memory remained vivid. He even suspected that if Michael hadn't intervened in time, he might have died before he became the strongest. Then again, at the time, his report contained some words that were forbidden within the church. Tsubaki, are you interested? Yasuhiro intended to continue his efforts to gather talent, despite his recent failures. He was just guiding a devil to the right path. Don't even think about it. Sona interrupted calmly. Yasuhiro's actions were a blatant disregard for her status as a master, openly and brazenly trying to poach her peerage members right in front of her. That's a real shame, but you should really consider it. My offer is excellent. Even at the very end, Yasuhiro didn't forget to try and entice her. Sona was furious. Tsubaki simply smiled and refused, not daring to make any further moves, lest her master might do something irrational. After all, it had been a month, and not only she, but all the other members could feel that their master's usual rationality had been pushed to its absolute limit by Yasuhiro's persistent teasing. Knock, knock. Just then, there was a knock on the door. Please come in. It was Kaneko who came in. President Sona. Kaneko politely greeted Sona, then walked up to Yasuhiro and handed him a letter. //. Now, do all devils have the habit of sending letters? Yasuhiro took the letter from Kaneko's hand and gave Sona a meaningful look. He received a warning look from Sona in return. A challenge. Yasuhiro opened the letter, read its contents, and understood the whole story. It was a formal challenge from Yuto Kiba, proposing a duel against him. The text contained phrases like fight me or make me understand. Yasuhiro felt that the content of the letter had been altered. The original wording was probably a challenge of death. Everyone in the council was surprised. They knew how formidable Yasuhiro was. Just because they had peacefully coexisted for nearly a month didn't mean they had forgotten the unpleasantness of their first meeting. That aura was enough to send chills down their spines even till this date. In particular, Saji had directly experienced Yasuhiro's pressure. Whenever he thought of it, he would shudder and avoid Yasuhiro's gaze. The president said she won't let you do this for nothing. She will help you in Asia secure suitable familiars in the familiar forest as payment. Kaneko remained as expressionless as ever. However, her eyes revealed expectation. Yasuhiro naturally placed his hand on Kaneko's hair and ruffled it as if petting a cat. To everyone's surprise, Kaneko struggled a few times in protest, but seeing that she couldn't get rid of the hand on her head, she gave up and let him do as he pleased. It was funny to think about, but the person Yasuhiro was closest to in the council was none other than Sona. After all, they had gone on a date before, which made their relationship a bit complicated. In ORC, theoretically speaking, the person closest to him should have been his brother, Issei. The truth, however, was quite the opposite. Ever since the violent awakening of his boosted gear, Yasuhiro seemed to have left a serious psychological shadow in Issei's heart. As a result, not only at school, but also when heading home, Issei would arrive much earlier or later than him. It was the same when going to school. It seemed that Issei was deliberately avoiding him. This made Yasuhiro wonder if he had gone too easy on him last time or Issei didn't learn his lesson well enough. Because of this gap, Yasuhiro became quite familiar with Kaneko, who often wandered around the campus. Seeing her reminded him of a cat he had raised in his previous life. So whenever he saw Kaneko, Yasuhiro couldn't resist petting her. The first time he petted her, they both nearly fought. Unfortunately, she was facing a him. The final result was, she was subjected to head rubs. Once, twice, 3 times. Kaneko went from initially bristling, to struggling and resisting, and finally to making a mere symbolic struggle, as if she had gotten used to Yasuhiro's petting. Yasuhiro's behavior accounted for a significant portion of her positive impression of him. Neither I nor Asia are interested in devil familiars. Leaving me aside for now, after Asia completes her trials, the church will reward her with a holy beast as a future companion. Rias's willingness to offer a familiar as payment demonstrated her sincerity. Familiars held a status equivalent to the holy beasts, serving as strategic resources for various factions that couldn't be traded casually. Moreover, devils and the church were inherently hostile factions. So, if the terms and rewards satisfy you, you can accept this challenge. The student council's doors opened again, and Rias and Akeno walked in from outside. Rias spoke up, "Sona, I'm sorry, could we speak with him alone?" Sona nodded and led the members out. Kaneko and Akeno also left, leaving only Yasuhiro and Rias in the council office. "Holy Night," Yasuhiro interrupted, "you can just call me Yasuhiro, like Sona does." "Excuse me, Yasuhiro, but I hope you will accept this challenge from Kiba. That child can only overcome his fears only by facing you in a direct confrontation." Rias said with a hint of worry, "I imagine you've been quite troubled these past few days because of Yuto. Even if you haven't experienced the power of the Holy Sword firsthand, you should have a general idea of its lethality against devils. Aren't you afraid that I might accidentally kill your servant? This is the second thing I'm asking of you, please go easy on him during the duel." "I'm begging you," Rias said, bowing deeply. "My opinion of you devils has suddenly changed quite a bit. People like you and Sona, treating your peerage members as family, are probably rare even in the underworld." The Grimoire clan was known for its strong sense of loyalty. In the underworld today, far too many devils treated their peerage members as mere servants. When hunting devils in Europe, Yasuhiro had seen many pure-blood devils use their servants as cannon fodder in battle. "An evil piece," Yasuhiro casual said. "An evil piece." Rias didn't understand. "I can agree, but the reward must be an evil piece. I'll only need them for some time." "My evil piece." Rias didn't quite understand Yasuhiro's strange request. The evil pieces and the system surrounding them were fundamentally designed specifically for devil nobles, to compensate for the heavy losses suffered by the devil armies in the Great War. Rias had her own worries. "Don't worry, I'll only be examining your evil piece, it won't cause any damage. I'll return it to you in 7 days. "No problem." Rias readily agreed. "I look forward to seeing you at the gymnasium after school tomorrow." The next day, after school. Once the students had all left for the day, they set up a barrier to repel humans, large enough to cover the entire campus. "You're all here, aren't you? Asia, what are you doing here?" Among the spectators in the gymnasium, all the members of the council and the orc were present. Surprisingly, Asia stood with orc. "Yasuhiro, the president asked me to." Asia stammered, her hands clasped together nervously. Yasuhiro understood Rias's intention in bringing Asia, it would be foolish not to use such an excellent healer. "President. Asia, you joined the occult research club." "Yes." As she spoke, Asia lowered her head like a child admitting her mistake. "The president and the others are all good people." Looking at the expression in Asia's eyes, Yasuhiro could tell that his past month of education had been entirely in vain. Also, what was with this inexplicable feeling of having his carefully nurtured daughter stolen from him? "Yasuhiro, don't blame Asia too much. Joining the ORC was also for her own protection within the academy. Regarding the club's activities involving us, Asia hasn't been allowed direct contact." He didn't believe for a second that Rias didn't have any designs on Asia after witnessing the healing effects of Twilight healing. Even considering his feelings, she would definitely still use Twilight healing to carry out a lot of treatments. Just look at Rias bringing Asia here right now. My, I didn't think Yasuhiro would be this petty." After a month of getting to know each other, all the members of Orc felt a sense of goodwill toward Asia, even Yuto, who was in a slump and confused state. No one would be hostile to a girl with such purity. If I'm indeed as petty as you say, don't forget, I'm not only a holy knight but also a holy sword wielder, and to you devils, I'm an executioner. Yasuhiro looked at Akeno with a half-smile. Akeno was speechless. She hadn't expected Yasuhiro to say that. Usually, in this situation, wouldn't be better to play along with them. What a petty man. Yasuhiro, Kiba is here. Sona, who was standing nearby, interrupted the stalemate. For some reason, when she heard Yasuhiro refer to himself as an executioner, a wave of hesitation and frustration washed over her. She didn't want to hear that title, and she didn't want it coming from his mouth. Yasuhiro was unaware of the complex thoughts swirling in Sona's mind. Everyone looked at Yuto as he walked in. The members of Orc were used to it, but the council members couldn't help but widen their eyes, unable to believe that this seemingly listless and apathetic person was the heartthrob of the girls in the so-called Prince of Kuoh. Yuto's current appearance was completely different from his usual self at the academy. His messy hair, bloodshot eyes and dark bags under his eyes made him look scary. Yasuhiro deserved the vast majority of the credit for this. If it weren't for his words last time, things wouldn't have turned out this way. One thing he hadn't expected was that Yuto's will was so fragile. Of course, this was just from Yasuhiro's paw. For Yuto, destroying the holy swords was his only pillar and motivation to survive. And Yasuhiro had directly shattered all of those beliefs. Make your move. If I make the first move, this duel will be over. Anyone listening could sense that Yasuhiro's words were incredibly arrogant. Usually, in stories, the guy who says such things is just a minor character about to face a brutal beating from the MC. Unfortunately, this wasn't a story. What they faced now was reality, which was often filled with helplessness and harsh truths. To everyone present, Yasuhiro's words were reasonable because they had all witnessed his overwhelming despair-inducing power. Yuto didn't say much. He used his sword birth to create two demonic swords with different attributes, one of ice and the other of fire. He then slashed toward Yasuhiro. Even though Yasuhiro could crush this attack barehanded, this time Yuto was specifically challenging him, aka a holy sword wielder. A holy light shone brightly in the gymnasium, and the Excalibur blessing appeared in Yasuhiro's hand. The light had a negative effect on all the devils present. They felt a slight burning sensation on their skin just from being under the light. Yuto, who was charging forward, was affected by this and paused slightly. Then, as if boundless power was flowing into his body, his eyes turned bloodshot, making him look more like a monster from hell. Soon, the holy sword and the demonic swords clashed together. It's actually the Excalibur blessing. Rias and the others then noticed the peculiarity of the holy sword that Yasuhiro held. Its appearance wasn't like a typical sword, it looked more like a ruler. This was their second time seeing it. The first time, they had been too concerned about Issei's safety and had only glanced briefly. After that, Issei's awakening of the boosted gear and the incident with Yuto made them forget about this matter, and they didn't confirm exactly which holy sword Yasuhiro was wielding. President, that sort of looks scary, Ryakusaka couldn't help but say with curiosity. For those of them who had only recently been reincarnated as devils and had just begun to explore the supernatural world, they had only heard of the holy sword's fame and knew little about its details. This was unlike the Orc, where apart from Issei, everyone had been into the supernatural before being reincarnated as a devil. In terms of danger, the Excalibur blessing is strongest among holy swords but only for devils. Sona watched as Yasuhiro fought wielding the sword. Though this looked like a duel, it was clear to the naked eye that he was merely toying with Rias's knight. Yasuhiro's strength had once again shattered the perceptions of those who didn't fully understand his power. My brother, I think he mentioned that his holy sword is both the strongest and the weakest amongst holy swords. Unwilling to remain merely a background character, Issei interjected. His interruption drew the attention of many, who then glanced back at Yasuhiro engaged in the fight. Many wondered why, despite being brothers, they were so different in caliber. If it weren't for Issei's good luck in having the boosted gear, he probably would have been an ordinary person. Slow to react, Issei finally noticed the strange looks from the others, leaving him somewhat bewildered. The Excalibur blessing is undoubtedly a divine weapon in the eyes of exorcists. As its name suggests, this holy sword was designed for use on the battlefield to bless, heal, and restore the status of allies. That was its original design concept, Rias explained in a single breath. As everyone knows, the original Excalibur was destroyed. The Church and Heaven collected the fragments and reforged 7 holy swords using alchemy. These 7 swords are significantly weaker in power and effectiveness against devils, far inferior to its original. However, Excalibur Blessing was an exception. The forging deviated from its intended purpose, and the alchemists abandoned the original characteristic. Thus, a holy sword was forged that surpassed the original Excalibur in its ability to restrain devils. This is the Excalibur Blessing. Its only flaw is that, aside from the sacred power that restrains devils, this sword possesses only its inherent hardness. It has no lethality against non-devils or other regular creatures. After Rias's explanation, it was all clear. Yuto's body soon bore black burns. This was the result of being touched by that holy sword. Issei nearly developed PTSD seeing this again. He had been hit hard by the Excalibur blessing several times, and he still remembered that pain. In particular, when he saw the sword now, the places that had been hit and healed seemed to throb with phantom pain all over again. The demonic sword in Yuto's hand was forcibly broken by Yasuhiro. Sword birth. Immediately, the ground beneath their feet was filled with countless demonic swords which seems to be hurtling toward Yasuhiro. Yasuhiro shook his head inwardly. At this stage, the demonic swords Yuto created lacked hardness, not to mention any fancy elementalization or special features. He was incapable of reaching his balance breaker like he did in the light novels. This was pure brute force. Anyone with even a modicum of agility'd have had no trouble dodging it. Yasuhiro had no intention of dodging and was prepared to be savage for once. He held his sword across his chest, and a powerful force surged within him. A natural force aka ki manifested around his body. Soon the entire area was filled with broken shards of demonic swords. Damn! Yuto, who had fallen to the ground, immediately stood back up, created 2 more demonic swords, and charged forward again. Yuto. Rias and the others watched with concern as Yuto acted like a crazed beast. Rias, don't worry, I believe Yasuhiro will handle it, Sona comforted her. Rias felt that her friend seemed to have an unusual confidence in Yasuhiro. Yuto's attacks gradually became tedious for Yasuhiro. If he hadn't agreed to Rias's request, he didn't know how many times he could have killed this guy. The holy sword struck Yuto squarely in the back. However, the instant he fell to the ground, he stood up again. I can't lose. He raised his sword in agonizing pain and charged toward Yasuhiro once more. //. Despite being knocked away by the sword time and time again, Yuto rose again and again. Are you looking for death? If it weren't for Yasuhiro suppressing the holy power within the sword, he would have died countless times already. Issei could only withstand 2 or 3 direct attacks from Excalibur Blessing before his body was eroded inside out by the holy power. This was same for Yuto. Yuto had a suicidal attitude when he wrote that challenge letter, but fearing that he wouldn't be able to suppress himself seeing Yasuhiro, he had Kaneko deliver it. For him, however, looks like the content was changed by Rias. Based on the alterations in the letter, and considering this weakling's current state, Yasuhiro felt this might be the truth. Rias looked at the crazed Yuto with concern. If it weren't for the fact that Yasuhiro was holding back at every turn, and that Sona and Akeno were holding her back, she'd have stepped forward to stop this seemingly death duel. Go to hell, go to hell. Yuto's condition made Yasuhiro greatly annoyed. The deal with Rias had only 2 conditions, to duel with Yuto and to spare his life. However, the main goal of everything was to help Yuto emerge from the trauma of holy swords. What a drag. Suddenly, Yasuhiro appeared to Yuto's right while the Excalibur blessing in his hand were shining brightly. He no longer intended to suppress the holy power or better the power of light. A light force erupted before his eyes, stinging Yuto to close his eyes. Rias and the others nearby were shocked to see the powerful energy surging. Before they could make any other move, Yasuhiro had already attacked. The holy power directly pushed through Yuto's body and penetrated his internal organs. Yuto slowly collapsed to the ground. He tried to struggle to his feet again, but his body, penetrated, eroded and destroyed by the power of light, no longer allowed him to move. He could only lie on the ground like a weakling, completely at the mercy of others. Seeing that Yuto was alive, Rias and the others stopped in their tracks, quietly waiting to see what had happened next. Yuto Kiba, if you want to die, I won't stop you. Just run headfirst into it, I think you can manage that. Yasuhiro planted the sword into the ground next to Yuto. If he only moved his body slightly to get closer to the blade, the holy power emanating from it, would be enough to kill him. Yuto made no move, nor did he respond to Yasuhiro's words. He simply gazed silently at the holy sword reflecting in his eyes, recalling the past. It was for the sake of this weapon that his companions and friends had endured the most agonizing trials, for becoming holy sword wielders was their faith. But what awaited them in the end was the word failure. And a cruel fate of death. The holy sword. Yuto's lips parted slightly, revealing his somewhat chapped mouth. His tone was filled with despair and the deepest abandoned hope in his heart, his childhood expectation of holy swords. Many people who knew Yuto's past couldn't help but feel crushed seeing this scene, and several council members had tears welling up their eyes. Yuto's next move surprised many, yet they found it understandable. He shakily extended his right hand and gently stroked the blade, completely disregarding the power emanating from the weapon that was constantly burning his hand. With just a gentle touch, that portion was completely burned. Yasuhiro sighed softly. The Holy Sword Project, just as he had said, was a stain on the church, and even with their desperate attempts to cover it up, that fact won't change. Yasuhiro pulled out the Excalibur blessing. He couldn't let him continue to touch the weapon. If his body continued to accumulate too much holy power, it would clash with his demonic power within him. At that point, even with Asius, he probably wouldn't be able to escape death. Asia. Yasuhiro called out to Asia, who was already eager to get onto the field. Under the light of Asia's twilight healing, Yuto's skin that was burned by the sword, was completely healed. Valpyr Galilei, remember this name. He was the mastermind behind the Holy Sword Project, and he was the one who gave the order to dispose of you all. After that incident surfaced, he left the church and became a stray. With that, Yuto had a new goal in mind. All he wanted now was to kill that bastard. Why? Before he could finish his sentence, Yuto fainted. Asia's sacred gear could only treat physical injuries, it didn't offer much help in restoring mental exhaustion. After a month of mental anguish, and the damage inflicted during his duel with Yasuhiro, had him completely exhausted. Soon, Yasuhiro left the gymnasium with Asia. His demeanor was so charming. I'm envious of Asia, Akeno couldn't help but arch slightly. She observed that Tsubaki, and several other council members had a strange look in their eyes. What amused her most was that even Kaneko beside her seemed to have a slightly off-look attitude. I'm becoming more and more interested in you, Yasuhiro Hyoudou, and that day, Yuen. Akeno muttered to herself in the dark. Akeno's IMG. The Hyoudou residence. Only Issei, Yasuhiro, and Asia remained in the house. Anticipating that it wouldn't be long before the entire Kuoh, centered around Kuoh Academy, would become the epicenter of a war, Yasuhiro had arranged for his parents to travel abroad ahead of time. Their main tourist destination was Europe, which was sufficient to protect their safety. This is the evil piece the president asked me to deliver. Akeno handed the evil piece set to Yasuhiro. He thought it would be Kaneko or Issei who brought it to him, but unexpectedly, it was Akeno. Thank you for your trouble. You're too kind. Would you like to accompany me for a walk before class? Akeno would never admit that she stole Kaneko's job. She could still picture Kaneko's sullen expression. Can I say no? Of course not. Akeno waved her finger and said word by word, if you refuse a beautiful girl's request, you'll get struck by lightning. Being struck by lightning is an essential part of a holy knight's training process. Yasuhiro, why do you always contradict me when we talk? When you were on your date with President Sona, you were so charming. Yasuhiro paused slightly then said, you saw us. He didn't believe that anyone in Kuoh could spy on him without being discovered. Akeno knowing about this was most likely just a coincidence. At the time, she had taken a day off because of some trivial matters at the shrine. Passing by the amusement park, she had unexpectedly run into Sona and Yasuhiro, on a date. That was quite astonishing. Therefore, she hadn't told anyone about it, not even Rias. The piece that you played for President Sona was unforgettable, and that final kiss was so romantic. At the time, when Akeno spotted Yasuhiro and Sona, he had been playing Myself for her, and their date was nearing its end. Akeno was unaware of the song's title, but that didn't prevent it from evoking memories of her childhood, of the beautiful and warm life she had shared with her mother at the shrine. It was around that time that she developed a strong interest in this holy night. When a woman becomes interested in a man, that is the beginning of her downfall. Have you heard this saying, Akeno? I want to be your real girlfriend, Yasuhiro. Akeno sighed in front of him. Is that so? Yasuhiro looked at Akeno with a half smile. Yasuhiro extended his right hand and teasingly lifted Akeno's chin. To someone who didn't know the situation, it looked like he was flirting with a well-behaved girl. Akeno was somewhat bewildered by Yasuhiro's sudden actions. She had never been so intimate with any man before. Akeno had miscalculated, realizing she'd chosen the wrong target this time. This guy standing in front of her was not some man who would lose his bearings after a few flirtatious words. Compared to your fake self, I still prefer Sona. Before Akeno could break free, Yasuhiro released her. Never mind. How heartbreaking. No woman would like to be told to her face that another woman was more attractive, not to mention she was ranked one place higher than Sona in the Academy's popularity rankings. And he even called her fake. This filled Akeno with resentment and dissatisfaction. What a blind man. Yasuhiro had never denied Akeno's beauty and charm. For many, her charm far surpassed that of Sona. Her Yamato Nadeshiko aura alone added to her appeal. After all, she was simply the perfect lover and marriage partner. Everyone likes a beautiful and charming woman, especially one who radiates her own unique brilliance. Yasuhiro was no exception. However, Akeno was currently a troublesome matter, both in terms of romance and in other aspects. If he didn't break her outer shell, he wouldn't get into her heart. Akeno seemed to notice something, and suddenly, she moved close to Yasuhiro's cheek. Looking at the beautiful, flawless face approaching his, the two of them still maintained a safe distance. He leaned forward, closing the gap. Akeno's eyes widened with disbelief and a hint of annoyance. Asshole. Akeno shoved Yasuhiro aside, glared at the guy in front of her and left without another word. Sona, since you're here, come out. Sona emerged from the shadows, looking expressionless. Akeno had sensed Sona's arrival, which was why she intentionally created that misunderstanding. In the end, however, her attempt to play tricks had backfired and Yasuhiro, taking advantage of the situation, kissed her. That being said, if Akeno could spot Sona, then there was no reason why Yasuhiro, whose strength was countless times greater than hers, wouldn't have noticed. Yasuhiro, we hope you'll strictly abide by the school rules and regulations while at the academy, Sona said coldly. Don't do anything that would damage the academy's reputation or be considered improper. You're jealous. Hearing Yasuhiro's words, her already cold face turned even colder. Yasuhiro, please watch your words and actions. I've been careful, isn't that how it always is when a guy is with his girlfriend? Girlfriend, Sona thought resentfully, when did I become this guy's girlfriend? Yasuhiro, we have no relationship. Please don't spread rumors. Sona's words had no effect whatsoever on the shameless Yasuhiro. Instead, Yasuhiro walked up to Sona and naturally took her soft hand in his. In a sense, you could be considered my ex-girlfriend. Your expression right now looks exactly like someone who caught their boyfriend cheating, the look of someone who caught them in the act. No, I'm not, Sona instinctively retorted. Sona, the way you are acting now makes it too easy for anyone to guess what you are thinking. If it were the normal Sona, she'd have turned around and left long ago, and wouldn't have stayed to chat with me. Yasuhiro's hands were gently holding and caressing Sona's, as if he couldn't bear to part with them. Sona fell silent, ignoring the actions between her and Yasuhiro. She felt somewhat lost, unsure of her own feelings. Just as he had said, she, usually so composed, would never act in this way. On the contrary, she preferred to ignore such things. People often lose their composure when faced with something that's closely related to their own hearts. Sona desperately needed to calm down right now. She was probably in no condition to even handle her council duties. Here, take this. Sona forcibly returned to her usual state, took out an object, and stuffed it into Yasuhiro's hand. An evil piece. Yasuhiro stared in surprise at the evil piece in his hand. This was no ordinary evil piece. How could she has a king piece? From the faint traces of familiar demonic power remaining on it, it wasn't difficult to determine that this evil piece. Sona, with your intelligence, you should be able to guess why I asked Rias for her evil piece. Sona nodded. Unlike Rias, who was anxious about her peerage and had lost her basic calculating abilities, Sona was much stronger than Rias in terms of rational deduction. Therefore, when she heard Yasuhiro was demanding the pieces from Rias, she was able to guess his purpose. Doing this will put you in a difficult position as the Mao's sister. By giving him the king piece, Sona in a sense betrayed the underworld. This was different from when he asked Rias for hers. Even though Rias felt it was inappropriate, she gave it partly because of Yuto and hadn't thought it through deeply. On the other hand, with Yuto's matter resolved, Rias had roughly figured out the ins and outs and should have guessed the same thing as Sona. The reason Rias still dared to give it to Yasuhiro was because she felt he wouldn't succeed with her pieces. Yes, according to Yasuhiro's calculations, even if he obtained Rias's evil pieces, the chances of success were not high, less than 20%. However, now that he had obtained this king piece, the success would at least be around 50%. I don't care. Just take it along with my other pieces. Thank you. Looking at the persistent girl before him, Yasuhiro had 1,000 words to say, but he simply reduced them to those two. Sona didn't say much, she just looked at him quietly. Yasuhiro stepped forward, using the same familiar posture to pull Sona quietly into his arms. The two simply embraced silently, without uttering a single word. However, the increasingly determined look in Sona's eyes were constantly telling Yasuhiro that she had truly faced her own heart and confirmed her feelings for him. She didn't know exactly when she had fallen for this holy knight from church. Was it during their date, when he personally played myself for her? Or later, when he forcefully stole her first kiss? Or perhaps, during yesterday's duel with Yuto, she was touched by the gentleness hidden deep in his heart. None of that mattered anymore. If you like someone, you like them, there is no need for excuses or reasons. The impact of her impulsive actions on the underworld would be far greater than the impact of her previous refusal of the marriage set by her family. The fact she and Yasuhiro belonged to different factions meant their relationship was destined to be fraught with uncertainty. Sona didn't want to think about these annoying problems, she just wanted to quietly embrace him. Yasuhiro had taken a week-long leave of absence. Many girls at Kuoh Academy sighed with regret, knowing they wouldn't be able to see their prince for a whole week. Over the course of this month, Yasuhiro's popularity among the girls had skyrocketed to the point where he was on par with Yuto. Yasuhiro's request for leave infuriated Akeno, who wanted to pay him back. Ever since Yasuhiro took liberties with her, she hadn't been able to sleep at night. Every time she closed her eyes, she recalled the moment Yasuhiro leaned in close to her. It was as if the memory had taken root in her mind and could never be erased. Coincidentally, right as Yasuhiro took a leave of absence, Sona asked for 3 days off. The student council president was considered a model student at Kuoh Academy. She rarely took time off, and a 3-day leave of absence had never happened before. The time periods for their leaves of absence overlapped completely. Not to mention, Yasuhiro had been pulled into the council as soon as he transferred in. Based on these various signs, rumors spread like wildfire throughout the academy. Furthermore, quite a few of Sona's fervent fans claimed that they would teach Yasuhiro a lesson if they encountered him on campus. The members of the council were more composed, they didn't believe that their president would have any relationship with a holy knight. First, it was considered impossible. One was a pure-blood devil noble from the underworld and the other was a holy knight of the church. Secondly, within the academy, they were almost always together with the president and Yasuhiro. They had the duty to monitor Yasuhiro, and they had never seen any intimate contact between the two. Meanwhile at the Orc, Rias couldn't believe that her childhood best friend would go out with that man. Akeno knew some of the inside story between the two, but she wasn't sure of the exact details. She just guessed that their relationship wasn't as exaggerated as the rumors made it out to be. Meanwhile, in a villa not far from Kuoh. This villa had been purchased by Yasuhiro and Asia when they first arrived in Kuoh town. They hadn't finished renovating it at the time, so they hadn't moved in. A few days ago, the renovations were finally completed and he was planning to move in with Asia in a few days. With Issei present in their parents' home, handling certain matters concerning the church had become inconvenient. What he needed to do today could not be known by Issei, who had now become a devil, at least not yet. This was not only because of his identity, but also because of certain security concerns. In the basement, it would be more accurate to call it a training room than a basement, the massive underground space had been transformed into a training facility. Yasuhiro sat on the floor, with 3 evil pieces placed in front of him. The leftmost piece belonged to Rias, the middle one to Sona, and the rightmost one was from Diodora Astaroth, the devil whom he had killed. What Yasuhiro wanted to research was how to crack the evil piece system and obtain the core technology within it that allowed other races, especially humans, to be reincarnated as devils. The entire evil pieces and the rating games were created by the current Mawajuka. Heaven had tried to obtain this technology from Ajuka more than once. After the Great War, the god of the Bible had fallen, making it impossible for new angels to be born. Moreover, some of the existing angels occasionally fell from heaven and became fallen angels. This put the future of heaven in jeopardy. It was only able to maintain its status as one of the 3 factions because the god of the Bible had risked everything to preserve its remaining strength after the Great War. As a result, apart from the death of God, very few high-class angels had fallen, and the losses among the middle and lower classes were relatively minor compared to the fallen angels and devils. However, without the birth of new angels, heaven was undoubtedly doomed. No matter how many angels had survived, their numbers would eventually dwindle little by little over an endless span of time. The urgent task became how to bring forth new angels. The evil pieces invented by Ajuka brought a glimmer of hope to heaven. However, the devils had no reason to share this technology with heaven. Taking it by force was even more impossible. Not to mention that Ajuka was deep in the underworld, going there to steal it would be tantamount to declaring war against the devils, and the flames of war that had long since been extinguished would be reignited. As a super devil, Ajuka was not easy to deal with. Within heaven, there was a system left behind by the god with it. The angels weren't afraid of any attacks from super devils. However, things were different in the underworld. After all, heaven had not yet produced its own transcendental class, and Yasuhiro was still working hard to become one or find a way to achieve it. Heaven had also begun to study how to reincarnate humans into angels. The basic theoretical framework had been completed, and now only the final technical module remained. However, they had studied this last module for hundreds of years but hadn't been able to crack it. Angels had conducted research on evil pieces, but ordinary evil pieces contained no usable technological remnants. Just when they were about to give up, Yasuhiro knew from his memories of the light novel that they were waiting for the day when the 3 factions would sign a peace treaty. At that time, knowledge sharing among the 3 races would finally be realized. Though, it was better to rely on yourself than to ask others, but unfortunately they were unable to figure it out and could only wait helplessly. After Yasuhiro killed Diodora, he obtained his evil piece and was surprised to find that it contained fragments of knowledge about the exact technology modules that the angels needed most. This delighted Yasuhiro. His research revealed that evil pieces embedded with these knowledge fragments were significantly stronger than ordinary evil pieces. Most importantly, some of their internal structures could be optimized and upgraded, further enhancing the strength of the servants. Without a doubt, the owners of these special, customized evil pieces generally held extremely high positions in the underworld. Rias and Sona belonged to this category. At the same time, cracking this technology was an additional goal of his aside from just wanting to witness the development of the story. Just as I thought. Compared to Diodora's pieces, these actually contain seals. Yasuhiro carefully examined the pieces belonging to Rias and Sona in front of him. He sensed a seal far exceeding the level of an ordinary Mao. Without a doubt, it was placed there by a Juka.